In the quiet transition between this world and the next, a captivating tapestry of cosmic mysteries and hidden truths unfurls. Enter the ethereal puzzle concealed within The Life Beyond Death by Yogi Ramacharaka, a text beckoning you to delve into the depths of existence beyond the final frontier. As the esteemed Yogi Ramacharaka traversed the veil separating life and death, he bestowed upon the world a legacy of profound wisdom. Now, within this enthralling narrative, his transcendent insights unfold like a roadmap to uncharted realms. Venture boldly into dimensions where time and space weave an eternal dance, where the echoes of ancient sages resonate throughout the corridors of the beyond. Explore the secrets entwined in the invisible thread, connecting tangible reality to the very essence of existence. Journey alongside the seeker through astral realms, where the boundaries of perception blur and souls discover their true purpose in the vast expanse of the cosmos. Prepare to uncover the enigmas lying beyond the threshold of life, as ancestral wisdom whispers defy logic and stir the curiosity of those questing for answers in the deepest recesses of the universe. Are you prepared to embark on a captivating odyssey to the afterlife? The veil lifts, and truth awaits those courageous enough to embrace its revelation. The transformational journey from death to astral planes to Renaissance and beyond. William Walker Atkinson, writing under the name of Yogi Ramacharaka, One from the Other Side. One of the most frequently asked questions to the masters of Eastern wisdom is, what do you teach on the other side of the river of death? To the trained and developed occultist, the question seems strange. It has the same effect as if one were to ask an ordinary person what they teach on the other side. The mystic would naturally be surprised that questions are being asked about teaching on this subject, as the questioner should simply see it for themselves to get an answer. The Oriental never ceases to wonder at the many evidences of purely theoretical and dogmatic teachings on the Western side by most masters and preachers of the Western world. These so-called masters are like blind leading other blinds, for they lack the means to verify their claims and content themselves with passing on what they have received blindly from others, who themselves received their instruction in the same manner. In contrast, in the East, one encounters many individuals with high and developed psychic and spiritual faculties, for whom the phenomena of the other side are as familiar as those of this side, and the other side is as real to them as the ordinary atmosphere of the world on this earth. Among the educated Orientals, the afterlife is not an unexplored ocean, but is as perfectly known in its depths, islands, and general features as an expert Western sailor may know the Atlantic. Moreover, every educated Oriental learns from childhood that the phenomena of the other side are not matters of faith, but can actually be known by all who are willing to devote the time and study necessary to develop the higher senses possessed by the entire human race. However, for the same reasons, the advanced Oriental occultist is perplexed, even discouraged, when he must convey his knowledge on the subject to Western students. The Western mind instinctively refuses to accept truth as understood by the Eastern student, having not himself understood by his own experience certain psychic and spiritual phenomena upon which these teachings rest. The Western mind demands conclusive proof of these phenomena before wishing to advance, for these facts must first be experienced to be known. No argument is valid to bring this conviction of truth, which must serve as the fundamental basis for detailed teaching. Therefore, the Western student either accepts on faith the basic general assertions of the master, or regards them as mere conjectures and speculations of the master. As in the West, thousands of such conjectures and speculative theories are presented. The student may well refrain from accepting any of them as truth, for, as he often argues, one conjecture is as good as another. In laying out the facts of the other side, to which this volume is dedicated, the student must understand from the outset that no material proof will be provided to him in the absence of a high level of development of his higher psychic and spiritual faculties. In his case, the proof demanded would be similar to that which a blind person demands from the other side of scarlet or any other color, or which a deaf person demands of proof of the existence of harmony in music. By the very nature of things, proof cannot be provided in this case. Imagine trying to explain the taste sensation of sugar to someone who has never experienced the taste of sweetness. How and where can you start? How and where can you proceed? Thus understand in the mind of a traveler returning from a new and strange country who tells the stories of his journey and what he experienced, as we said to students in our first lessons given to the Western world 9 years ago. We do not mean that Oriental masters insist that the student blindly accept any truth presented to him. On the contrary, they instruct the student to accept as truth only what he can prove for himself, for no truth is a truth to him until he can prove it by his own experiences. But the student is taught that before many truths can be proved, the master must develop and unfold himself. The master simply asks the student to have confidence in him as one who points the way and indeed says to the student, "This is the path between within and upon the path. You will find the things I have taught you. Handle them, weigh them, measure them for yourself. When you reach any point on the path, you will know as much as I or any other soul at that particular stage of the journey. But until you reach a particular point, you must accept the statements of those who have gone before, or reject the whole subject at that precise point. Take nothing as final until you have proved it, but if you are wise, you will benefit from the advice and experience of those who have gone before. Each person must learn through experience, but people can serve to guide others at every stage of the journey. You will find that those who have progressed a little further on the path have left signs, marks, and guides for those who follow. The wise will use these signs. I do not ask for blind faith, but only trust until you can prove to yourself the truths I impart to you, just as those who came before me imparted them to me. The skeptical Western student may object that we do not provide scientific evidence of phenomena beyond. If by scientific he means evidence of physical science, we agree with him. But for the advanced occultist, the term scientific has a much broader meaning. The person who expects to weigh, measure, and record spiritual things according to physical standards will only find disappointment and failure, for he will never receive the proof he seeks. The physical apparatus is intended only for physical objects. The spiritual world has its own set of apparatus capable of recording its phenomena. Therefore, we want the reader embarking on the study of this book to clearly understand this point. No physical proof is offered. None, strictly speaking, can be found anywhere. Furthermore, we will not attempt to argue, for there is no basis for argument between seers of the beyond and those whose vision is limited to the earthly plane. This does not mean that we offer a multitude of irrational statements and insist that you take them on faith. That is not our intention. Although reason alone can never hope to pierce the veil separating the two sides of life and death, yet if reason is allowed to follow its own observations, free from prejudice and blind adherence to teaching, it will perceive a certain rationality in a truthful statement of the facts of the unknown. It will appear that the teachings harmonize with other accepted facts and reasonably explain phenomena that would otherwise be inexplicable. In summary, it will seem that the teachings of truth reconcile sets of apparently opposing facts and unite many obscure parts of truth that are known that our reason accepts, but that until now we have not been able to assemble or unite into a connected structure of mental concept. The student is encouraged to suspend judgment until he has read carefully and then considered thoughtfully what we have to say. Then we encourage him to reread and reconsider the book as a whole, and then honestly ask the question, does this seem reasonable and probable? If he can do nothing else but accept everything as a working hypothesis, let him remain satisfied with that position. Although the term may make us smile, for we understand that teaching is based on experiences, the testimony of sages through the centuries, but if the teaching is read and analyzed carefully, it will be found to become more and more reasonable over the years. With time, the individual will find that one fact after another fits into the general teaching. And as older conceptions are discarded, it will be seen that these teachings take their place. It is not easy to escape a truth once it has been presented to you. It has a way of buzzing in the mental ear once it has settled there. Because there is a part of you behind that ear, even though it may be hidden by many envelopes, it knows nonetheless. Even if you deny it, You cannot escape the truth once its seed has lodged in your consciousness. It will draw its sustenance from your subconscious, and in time, it will sprout and produce leaves and flowers. So after all, it matters little whether the student fully understands the teaching at this moment, for time is long, and one has all the time that exists to master the lesson. All teachings are ultimately but a process of sowing seeds. There is no death. The human race has been hypnotized by the idea of death. The common use of the term reflects the illusion. We hear those who should know speak of individuals who have been blinded by the angel of death, blinded in their prime, their activities ended, etc. The idea being expressed is that the individual has been erased from existence and reduced to nothing. In the Western world, this is particularly true, although the dominant religion teaches the joys of the afterlife so strongly that it would seem that all believers should welcome the transition with joy. Although one might suppose that relatives and friends would don joyful robes and cover themselves with bright flowers to mark the passing of the beloved to a happier and brighter sphere of existence, the opposite is observed. The average person, despite his faith and creed, seems to fear the arrival of the angel of death. His friends don black robes and show signs of having lost the loved one forever, despite their beliefs or what those beliefs express. Death is permeated with a terror that apparently they cannot overcome. For those who have acquired the sense of consciousness of the illusion of death, these terrible emotions have disappeared for them. Although they naturally feel the pain of temporary separation and the loss of beloved company, the person has simply moved on to another phase of life, and nothing has been lost, nothing deserved. There exists an ancient Hindu fable that tells the story of a caterpillar sensing the proximity of the tongue, presaging the end of the crawling stage of its existence and the beginning of the long sleep of the chrysalis stage. It calls its friends around it and sadly says, "To think that I must abandon my life full of so many bright promises of future achievements, blinded by the angel of death in its prime, I am an example of nature's cruelty. Farewell, good friends. Farewell forever. Tomorrow I shall exist no more." And accompanied by the tears and lamentations of the friends surrounding its deathbed, an old caterpillar passes away. With sadness it remarks, "Our brother has left us, his fate is ours too. One by one we will be blinded by the destroyer's scythe, like the grass of the field. By faith we hope to be reborn again, but perhaps this is nothing more than the voice inspired by vain hope. None of us knows anything concrete about another life. We regret the common destiny of our race." So, sadly, they all depart. The sad irony of this little fable is clearly perceived by all of us, and we smile at the ignorance with which the first stage of the transformation of the humble worm into the glorious creature that will eventually emerge from the sleep of death was confronted. But friend, do not smile at the illusion of the caterpillars. They were simply like you and me. The Hindu narrator of so many past centuries portrayed human ignorance and illusion in this little fable of lower forms of life. All occultists recognize in the stages of transformation of the caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly, an image of the transformation that awaits every mortal man and woman, for the death of the human being is not a termination or cessation, just as the sleep of death in no case does life cease, not even for a moment. Life persists as nature works its changes. We advise all students to take with them the lesson of this little fable told centuries ago to Hindu children and passed down from generation to generation. Strictly speaking, from the Eastern perspective, death does not exist. The name is a label. The idea is an illusion that arises from ignorance. There is no death. There is nothing but life. Life has many phases and forms, and some of these phases are called death by the ignorant. Nothing truly dies, although everything undergoes a change of form and activity, as beautifully expressed by Edwin Arlond in his translation of the Bhagavad Gita. The spiritual is never born. The spiritual will never cease to be. There has never been a time, end, and beginning. They are dreams without birth, without death, and without change. The spirit remains immutable forever. Death has not touched it at all, although its abode often seems dead. Materialists often argue against the persistence of life beyond death, based on the supposed fact that everything in nature undergoes death, dissolution, and destruction. If this were truly the case, it would be reasonable to argue the death of the soul as a logical conclusion. But in reality, nothing truly dies in nature. What is called death, even the smallest and seemingly inanimate, is simply a change of form and condition of the energy and activities that compose it. Even the body does not truly die in the strict sense of the term. The body is not an entity, it is simply an aggregation of cells, and these cells are simply material vehicles for a certain form of energy that animates and vitalizes them. When the soul leaves the body, the units that compose the body exhibit a repulsion towards each other instead of the attraction that held them together before. The unifying force that kept them united withdraws its power, and reverse activity manifests. As one writer said, the body is never more alive than when it is dead. As another writer said, death is but one aspect of life, and the destruction of a material form is but a prelude to the construction of another. Thus the materialist's argument truly lacks its main premise, and any reasoning based on it must be faulty and lead to a false conclusion. However, the advanced occultist, or any spiritually developed person, does not want to seriously consider the materialist's argument. Even if those arguments were 100 times more logical, for such a person has awakened within himself higher psychic and spiritual faculties through which he can know that the soul does not perish when the body dissolves. When one can leave behind the physical body and actually travel to the regions beyond, as is the case for many advanced individuals, any purely speculative discussion or argument about the reality of life after death seems absurd and futile. If an individual who has not yet reached the stage of psychic and spiritual discernment, by which he is given proof of the highest sense on the question of the survival of the soul, finds that his reason demands something like proof, then let him direct his mental gaze inward instead of outward, and there he will find what he seeks. Because ultimately, as all philosophy teaches us, the inner world is much more real than the world of external phenomena. In fact, the human being has no real knowledge of the external. All he has is what the internal reports to him about the impressions received from the external. The individual does not see the tree he is looking at, but he perceives the inverted image of that tree represented on his retina. Moreover, his mind does not even see that image, as it receives only the vibratory report of the nerves whose ends have been excited by that image. Therefore, we should not be ashamed to take a mental inventory of the internal windings of our mind, for many of the deepest truths are recorded there. In the vast regions of the subconscious and superconscious mind lie the knowledge of many fundamental truths of the universe. Among two of these strongly imprinted truths are the certainty of the existence of a supreme universal power beneath, behind, and supporting the phenomenal world, and the certainty of the immortality of the true inner being, that inner thing which fire cannot destroy, water cannot drown, nor air drag. The inward-directed mind will always find the self with the certainty that it is imperishable. It is true that this is a different type of proof than that required for material and physical objects. But what about the truth sought, which is a fact of spiritual inner life and not of physical external life? Therefore, it must be sought within and not outside the soul itself. The objective intellect concerns only physical objects, while the subjective intellect or intuition concerns psychic and spiritual objects. One concerns the body of things, the other the soul of things. You must seek knowledge of one of these two types of things in the appropriate region of your being. Let the soul speak for itself, and you will see that its song will ring out clearly, loudly, and gloriously. There is no death, there is no death, there is nothing but life, and that life is eternal. This is the song of the soul. Listen to it in silence, for it is only there that its vibrations can reach your eager ears. This is the song of life that always denies death. There is no death. There is nothing but eternal life, forever and ever. 3. The planes of life. One of the elementary ideas of yogic philosophy, most difficult for the average Western mind to understand and assimilate, is that of the planes of life. This difficulty is most apparent when the Western student attempts to grasp yogic teachings about the other side. Western thought insists on the concept of the realm of the life of the incorporeal soul, as a place or places. Western theology is largely responsible for this, although the tendency of the Western mind to think in terms of objective existence is also to be considered. Even the average Western religious person insists on thinking of heaven as a place located somewhere in space, containing beautiful gem-studded mansions situated on streets paved with gold. Even those who have outgrown this childish idea struggle to conceive of their heaven as a state rather than a place. The Western mind struggles to form the abstract concept, and naturally it reverts to the ancient idea of a heaven in space. In contrast, the Eastern mind finds it quite easy to compose the idea of different planes of existence. Centuries of reflection on the subject have made the concept as clear and defined as that of a place. We have encountered Western thinkers who, smiling, have confessed to us that they cannot shake off their concept of planes with that of a flat layer or a layer of some kind of material. But this conception is as far from the truth as the simple idea of place. A plane is a state, not a place in any sense of the term, and the student must learn to eliminate the idea of place from the plane. A plane is a condition or state of activity in the eternal energy of the mind, in which the cosmos lives, moves, and has its being. At any point in space, there can be many planes of activity. Let us take our examples from the physical world and use the ordinary vibration of sound as an illustration. The air can be filled with many notes of the musical scale. Each note is simply a certain degree of vibration of the air. The notes occupy the same position in space and yet do not conflict with each other regarding their qualities. Occupying space is an axiom of physics whereby no two bodies of matter can occupy the same space at the same time. But thousands of these vibratory notes can occupy the same space at the same time. This occurs not in listening to a great orchestral performance of a musical composition, where many instruments are played at the same time, and the air is filled with countless vibrations. And yet one can pick out any particular instrument if desired. One can even distinguish particular notes. No note is lost, and yet the entire volume manifests in the small space of the eardrum. This is a somewhat generic illustration, but it can serve to accustom the mind to form the appropriate concept. Another illustration, this time on a slightly larger scale, is that of the vibrations of light. We know that light appears due to the vibratory waves of the ether coming into contact with physical matter. Each color has its own place in the vibratory scale. Each sunbeam that reaches us is composed of a wide variety of colors. The colors of the spectrum can be separated by certain prismatic instruments. All colors are found at every point in space where the sunbeam appears. All are there and can be separated and recorded independently of each other. Furthermore, beyond the realm of visible light for the human eye, there are many colors invisible to human sight, due to vibrations too high or too low. These invisible colors can be detected by instruments. Perhaps these varying rates of vibratory color can help you form the idea of planes of existence without space. We can find another illustration in the realm of electricity, where we see further cases of various degrees and conditions of energy occupying the same space at the same time. In improved telegraphic devices, we find many messages passing in every direction along the same cable, each independent and none interfering with the others. Similarly, the air can be filled with 1,000 wireless telegraphic messages tuned to different keys and therefore not interfering with each other. Diverse vibrations may be conceivable, even that there may be a dozen worlds occupying the same portion of space, but each of them is encoded on a vibratory scale of very different material, and yet none interferes with the other. The beings living in each of them are totally unaware of the existence of those in the other. Scientific writers have enjoyed writing fantastic stories of a series of worlds thus, and indeed they have described better than they believe what they did not know, for they have symbolized in physical terms a metaphysical truth. But it can be objected, teaches yogic philosophy, that these planes of life are nothing more than variable forms of vibrations of matter. Far from it in any case. The teaching is that each plane represents a different degree of vibration, but not of matter. Even the finest matter is only a very low form of vibrational energy. There are much higher forms of material, the finest of which the ordinary physicist knows, for his finest matter is higher than the hardest rock. And beyond the plane of matter arises plane after plane of supramaterial energy, of which the mind of the physicist dare not even dream. And yet, for illustrative purposes, we can say that it is possible to think of each of the planes that manifest in the same place in space at the same time. As can be seen, the conception of planes has nothing in common with that of space. In consideration of the above, the student will see that when we speak of the planes of existence on the other side, we are far from wanting to indicate places or regions of space. Yogi philosophy has nothing to do with the doctrines of heavens, hells, or purgatories in the sense of places. It knows no such places or regions. Although it recognizes the real basis of the teachings supporting them in this particular volume, we will not attempt to consider the general question of the countless planes of existence that manifest in the universe. Its scope confines us to the consideration and description of these particular planes of the astral world, which deal with the manifestation of the existence of the bodiless souls of Earth's inhabitants, the so-called world of the spirits of the human race. We will see that there are many planes and subplanes of existence in the great astral plan of life, generally known as the astral world, in order to distinguish it from the physical world below it on the vibratory scale. Each plane and subplane has its own distinctive characteristics and phenomena, as we will see as we progress, and yet the same general laws, principles, and qualitative characteristics are common to all. Finally, before considering the astral plane, let us once again try to fix in your mind the correct conception of the real nature of what we know as planes. When we speak of ascending from a lower plane to a higher plane, or descending from a higher plane to a lower plane, we do not mean to be understood as climbing up or down stairs. Nor do we imagine a climb or descent from one layer or stratum to another. Even the familiar symbol of rising from the depths of the ocean to its surface is incorrect. The closest mental representation possible of the transition from one plane to another is that of an increase or decrease in vibrations, as seen in sound waves, light waves, or electric energy waves. By tightening a violin string, its degree of vibration, and thus its note, can be increased. Likewise, this can be done by heating an iron bar, which gradually changes its color from an opaque red to a delicate violet or white, or in the case of an electric current, power can be increased or decreased at will. If a more material illustration is needed, we have the case of the hardest mineral, which can be transformed into invisible vapor simply by increasing its degree of vibration through heat. What is true in the lower planes of manifestation is true in the higher planes. The transition from the higher to the lower, or from the lower to the higher, can be considered as a change of vibration in the energy of which all things are composed. This will be as close to the truth as our imperfect powers of conception and comparison allow. There are no words to express the higher phenomena. All illustrations in terms of the lower planes are crude, imperfect, and unsatisfactory. But even with these modest symbols, the human mind can learn to understand ideas of things beyond ordinary senses and beyond the power of ordinary terms to express. And now, with that firmly anchored in mind, let us turn to the consideration of the great astral plane of existence. The astral plane. Students of Eastern and Western occultism find many references in the works of ancient authorities to this great series of planes immediately superior to those of the material world, commonly called the astral plane. However, they find that these authorities differ in their use of the term. Many of the oldest ones use the term, as we will in this book, to denote the entire series of planes located between those of the material world and the highly exalted planes of existence, known as the spiritual planes, whose very nature is beyond the understanding of the average mind. On the other hand, some modern Western writers on the subject use the term astral plane to indicate only the lower and upper planes of the astral series, those planes that merge with the material planes on one side and with the higher astral planes on the other. This has caused some confusion in the minds of those beginning the study of the planes above the material plane. In this book, as in our previous volumes, we follow the example of the ancient authorities and apply the term as they did to the entire great series of planes located between the material planes and the spiritual planes. We consider this preferable as it is simpler and tends to avoid the student being misled due to many technical distinctions. The astral plane is composed of countless planes and subplanes and divisions of subplanes, rising on a gradually ascending scale from those which touch and merge with the higher material planes to those which touch and merge with the lower strata, if one may use the term, of the great spiritual planes. But between these two extremes lies the greatest possible variety of phenomena and phases of existence. In the lower planes of the astral manifest psychic activities that humans know as clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy, psychometry, etc. In other lower planes of the astral, there are found certain forms of ghosts, spectres, and other apparitions of bodiless souls that are occasionally perceived and felt by human beings and some lower animals. On some of these planes, the astral bodies of individuals who are still in the flesh travel and manifest activity, whether during the sleep of the owner of the body or under certain trance conditions, or when the owner deliberately leaves the physical body and projects their astral body onto the astral plane. Astral colors are auras that surround the physical bodies of all human beings and also manifest in certain subplanes of the astral. Some other subplanes may be called the planes of psychic forces, through which various psychic phenomena occur. In similar lower planes we find thought forms, thought waves, thought clouds, etc., emanating from the minds of human beings and traveling around them, affecting the thoughts and emotions of those who attract them and are in harmony with their psychic note or key. We mention this only in passing and for general information rather than in detail. Because these phenomena have been discussed in other volumes of this book series, some of the lower subplanes of the astral are far from healthy or pleasant places to visit or operate in for an untrained person. In fact, the experienced occultist has as little to do with them as possible and advises all occult enthusiasts to avoid these miasmic psychic regions as one would a fevered swamp. In the material plane, many people have done themselves much harm by attempting to penetrate these lower planes without a proper knowledge of their nature. Many have destroyed their bodies and minds by recklessly producing or inducing psychic conditions that cause them to function in these lower psychic planes. The old saying that informs us that fools rush in where angels fear to tread applies with full force in this case. Some of these lower astral subplanes are filled with astral forms of bodiless beings whose higher principles are still united with the astral body and who are still attached to the earth drawn by the material world. In this region, true incorporeal human life also temporarily dwells, for it has all the attraction to bind them to material things and nothing to draw them upwards. It is regrettable to see people who would not think of associating with such fleshly individuals welcoming psychic relationship and communication with this class of individuals on the astral plane, accepting them as blessed spirits and noble souls. The disgust felt by many people participating in spirit communication seances is easily understood when one understands the character of the entities inhabiting these lower planes. Some of these rascally inhabitants of the lower astral planes often pass themselves off as friends and relatives of the seeker, to the great surprise of the latter, for as they ascend the planes in degrees, we leave behind this class of entities and enter into the realms where dwell the incorporeal souls of those who have attained a high degree of spirituality. The higher one climbs the scale of planes and subplanes, the more one finally reaches the realms of the temporary blessed residence of those who have attained a high degree of spiritual development, the celestial worlds that the religions of humanity have attempted to define according to their beliefs and traditions. As in the beliefs of the human race, the existence of hells has also been postulated to oppose the idea of heaven. Likewise, in the astral world, as one might expect, some lower planes are inhabited by the bodiless souls of persons of brutal natures and tendencies, upon whom work is done for the inevitable outcome of their earthly life. But these astral hells are not eternal. The bodiless soul may in turn work to pass to a better environment. It may have another chance. The Catholic conception of purgatory also has its astral existence in the form of certain subplanes, where, as the ghost of Hamlet's father said, "Unpleasant crimes committed in my days of nature are consumed and purged, but not in the fire of materiality, for the fires of memory and imagination suffice." In summary, in the great astral plane are found conditions corresponding to almost all, if not all, conceptions formed by the human mind in relation to the religions of all times and places. These conceptions did not arise by mere chance. They are the result of the experience of certain humans who have somehow established a psychic connection with some of the numerous astral planes, each of which, according to its own nature and inclinations, has reported its experiences to its kindred, who have then incorporated them into the various religions of the world. It will be remembered that each human race has had its traditions about the place of departed souls. The description varies greatly, and yet all agree on certain details. As we progress, we will see how this information has been obtained and how it can be harmonized and understood in relation to each other. The term astral, of course, means pertaining to the stars. It was originally used in connection with occultism because of the common idea that the afterlife is located up in the heavens, the clouds, or in the regions of the stars. Even in our time, when the idea of heaven as a place has gone out of fashion in the minds of intelligent persons, it is quite natural for us to look up when speaking of heaven or to point upwards when we wish to indicate the abode of the blessed. It is difficult to shake off the customary concepts of the race, and even though we know better than to suppose that there is a special up or down in the cosmos, we still have the old inherited habit of thought which leads us to think of the higher realms of the soul as being towards the stars. Similarly, the ancient term astral has persisted in occult terminology. Once again, we must warn the student not to confuse the idea of the astral plane with the idea of place or places. There is no place called the astral plane. The astral plane is neither up nor down, nor north nor south, nor east nor west. It is not located in any particular direction, and yet it is located in all directions. It is first, last, and always a state or condition, and not a place. It is rather a phase or degree of vibration rather than a portion of space. Its dimensions are those of time, not of space. When we use the words region, higher or lower realm, up or down, we use them merely in a figurative sense, just as we speak of a high rate of vibration or a vibration rate above that, etc. It seems necessary to us to repeat this warning because of the fact that the average student falls into the error of associating the idea of plane with that of place, when there should be no mental association between the two. 5. After death. One of the most frequent questions asked by the average person considering the question of life on the other side is this: what is the experience of the soul immediately after leaving the body? It is regrettable to hear the answers given to this question by many so-called authorities on the subject. In reality, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. The average person imagines that the soul simply leaves the body and immediately enters into a new world of activity, a wonderland with strange and mysterious scenes. For many, there is the hope of being welcomed on the other side by all the dear ones who have gone before, a great reunion. While there is something that corresponds to this, there is also a completely different condition that the soul will experience immediately after leaving the body. Let us consider the experience of the soul immediately before and immediately after its exit from the body, so that we may gain a clearer light upon the subject. The person who approaches the stage, commonly called death, but which is merely a stage of transition between two great planes of life, experiences a gradual blunting of the physical senses. Sight, hearing, and touch become increasingly dim, and the person's life seems to be a flickering flame of a candle, gradually nearing total extinction. In many cases, this is the only phenomenon accompanying the approach of death. But in many other cases, while the physical senses fade, the psychic senses become wonderfully acute. It is common for dying persons to manifest an awareness of what is happening in another room or place. Clairvoyance often accompanies the approach of death, as well as in some cases, clairaudience. The dying person is aware of images and sounds in distant places, also in many cases recorded in the annals of psychic research societies, and many others reported privately within the family, where the dying person was able to project their personality with such force that distant friends and family indeed saw their form, and in some cases were able to converse with them. A careful examination shows that these appearances occurred in almost every case before the actual death of the person, not after. There are, of course, cases where the strong desire of the dying person led them to project their astral body in the presence of someone close immediately after death. But these cases are much rarer than those we have spoken of. In most of these cases, the phenomenon is caused by a process of thought transfer of such high power and degree that the person visited is impressed with the awareness of the presence of the dying friend or relative, even when the latter's soul is still in the body. In many cases, the dying person also becomes psychically aware of the proximity of their dear ones who have already passed away before. However, this does not necessarily mean that these persons are actually present on the scene. It must be remembered that the limitations of space are largely lifted on the astral plane, and that one can establish a close relationship with the other soul without there being any relationship of proximity in spatial terms. In other words, although the two souls may not be in what one might call spatial proximity, they may nevertheless enjoy a very close relationship of mind and soul. This is very difficult for one still in the flesh to understand. In the material plane, the laws of space govern, of course. Telepathy gives us the key to phenomena beyond. Two living people or in the flesh can experience a very close relationship by the communion of their mental principles, even if they are on opposite sides of the world. Similarly, two souls can enjoy the closest communion and communication of the soul without the problem of proximity in space. As we have said, the dying person frequently enters into communion and communication of the soul with those who are already on the other side, and this brings great joy to them. It is something beautiful that happens in what we call death. It really does happen that these beautiful reunions of loved ones that people talk about with so much hope occur. However, it does not happen in the way these good people generally tend to imagine. The astral body of the dying person gradually disengages from its physical counterpart. The astral body, as the student probably knows, is an exact counterpart of the physical body, and during life, the two reside together in most cases. However, the astral body leaves the physical body at the death of the latter and forms the soul's cover for a time. However, it is truly a form of material substance to some extent, so fine that it escapes tests revealing ordinary matter. Towards the end, the astral body actually slips out of the physical body and remains connected to it only by a thin thread or cord of astral substance. Finally, this thread breaks, and the astral body drifts away, inhabited by the soul that has left behind the physical body. However, this astral body is no longer the soul that the physical body it has just left was. Both physical bodies and astral bodies are only temporary covers for the soul itself. The soul that leaves the physical body, in the astral body, plunges into a deep sleep or coma-like state, similar to that of the fetus for several months before birth, thus preparing for rebirth on the astral plane, and taking the time necessary to acquire new conditions and increase the strength and vigor needed for its new phase of existence. Nature is full of such analogies. Birth on the physical plane and on the astral plane have many points of resemblance, and both are preceded by this period of coma. During this sleep-like stage, the soul resides in the astral body, which serves as its cover and protection, just as the womb serves as protection for the baby approaching physical birth. Before continuing, we must pause to consider certain features of the soul's life at this stage. Generally, the soul sleeps peacefully, without being disturbed and protected from external influences. However, two things tend to create an exception in some cases, namely what might be called the dreams of the sleeping soul. These dreams arise from two general classes of causes, namely intense desire that fills the mind of the dying person, such as love, hate, or unfulfilled tasks or duties, and the strong desires and thoughts of those who remain behind, whenever such persons have a sufficiently close relationship with the deceased soul for reasons of love or other strong attachments. One or both of these causes, even both, tend to produce agitation in the sleeping soul and draw the soul back to earthly scenes, either in a telepathic communication dream type, or in some rare cases by something resembling a state of sleepwalking, or sleepwalking in physical life. These conditions are unfortunate as they disturb the soul and delay its evolution and development in its new phase of existence. Let us consider this a little more in detail before continuing. A person passing from the material plane to the astral plane in a state of mental peace is rarely disturbed in astral sleep by dreamlike states. On the contrary, they naturally live during the coma state, then easily evolve into the new phase of existence as naturally as the petal opens into flower. It is different with the individual whose mind is filled with strong desires related to earthly life, or with strong remorse, hatred, or great love and excessive anxiety that remain behind in time. The poor soul is often tormented by these earthly ties, and its astral sleep becomes feverish and nervous. In such cases, there is often also an involuntary attempt to communicate with or appear to people still on the material plane. In extreme cases, as we have already said, a state similar to sleepwalking or sleepwalking may even occur, and the poor sleeping soul may even visit its former places. In such cases, when the apparition is visible to people, it will be observed that the deceased seems to look only half awake, as if something were missing that was present in earthly life. The history of ghosts confirms this assertion, and the explanation we have just given is the only one that truly sheds light on the subject. With time, however, these poor earthbound souls grow tired and eventually sink into the blessed sleep that is their due. Likewise, the strong desires of those who remain often serve to establish a relationship between these persons and the deceased soul, which troubles and distresses it. The actions of many well-meaning individuals have contributed to delaying the natural processes of the astral plane in relation to a dear departed one, and have denied the poor soul the deserved rest. On the subject of the soul's sleep, which we briefly touched upon in the previous chapter, we allow ourselves to quote one of our previous works, where this subject was briefly addressed as follows. The process of sinking into the state of rest and the solidity and continuity of it can be disrupted by those who remain alive on earth. A soul that has something on its mind to communicate or is afflicted by the grief of those who remain, especially if it hears constant lamentations and calls for its return, will struggle against the dream state that overwhelms it and will make desperate efforts to return. Similarly, the mental calls of those who remain disturb the sleep once it has fallen into it and cause the sleeping soul to awaken and struggle to respond to the calls, or at least partially awaken it and delay its development. These half-awake souls often manifest in spiritualist circles. Our pain and selfish requests often cause much pain and grief to our loved ones who have passed to the other side. Unless they have learned the true state of affairs before dying and refuse to be called even by those they love, cases are known where souls have struggled against sleep for years to be near their loved ones on earth. A reckless course, as it has caused unnecessary sadness and pain to both the deceased and those who remained on earth. We should avoid delaying the progress of those who have died with our selfish requests. Let them sleep and rest until the time of their transformation. Doing otherwise is making them die multiple times. Those who truly love and understand always avoid this, for their love and compassion command them to let the soul depart in peace, to take its deserved rest, and to achieve its full development. This period of soul sleep is like the existence of the baby in the maternal womb. It sleeps to be able to wake up in life with strength. There is another phase of this particular stage of the soul's progress that should be mentioned here. Once again, we quote what we previously wrote on the subject as follows. Only the soul of the person who has died a natural death sinks once into the sleep of the soul, if it is not disturbed. Those who die accidentally or are killed, in other words, those who leave the body suddenly, find themselves totally awake and fully in possession of their mental faculties for a time. Often they are not aware that they have died and do not understand what is happening to them. They are often fully aware for a short time of life on earth and can see and hear everything that is happening around them through their astral senses. They cannot understand that they have left the body and often remain completely perplexed. Their fate would be very unhappy for the days that pass until sleep finally takes them when the time comes. If it were not for the astral helpers, those blessed souls from higher states of existence who gather around them and gently communicate the news of their true condition, offer words of comfort and advice, and generally take care of them until they sink into the sleep of the soul, just as when a tired child falls asleep at night. These helpers never fail in their duty, and no one who dies suddenly, whether good or bad, is neglected. Because these helpers know that all are children of God and are their own spiritual brothers and sisters, it is known that people of high spiritual development and powers temporarily leave their physical bodies, residing in their astral bodies for the purpose of providing assistance and guidance in times of great disasters like the Johnstone flood and the Titanic disaster, or after a great battle when advice and immediate existence are needed. People who die in the manner we have spoken of course, gradually fall into the sleep of the soul, just as in the cases of those who die a natural death. Another question that must be mentioned at this point is the wonderful phenomenon of the review of the soul's past life, the great panorama that unfolds before its mental vision as it sinks into the sleep of the soul. Experts tell us that this truly occupies an infinitely short moment in time, a moment so brief that it can hardly be mentioned as an instant in time. However, in this brief moment, the soul witnesses the panorama of the life that has passed on earth, scene after scene, from childhood to old age. The most insignificant incident is reproduced with a fidelity of detail as great as the most important events. The subconscious plans of memory reveal secrets right up to the end. Nothing is reserved or hidden. Furthermore, the soul, through its revived spiritual discernment, is capable of knowing the meaning, cause, and consequences of every event in its life. It is capable of analyzing and judging itself like an omniscient and impartial judge. The result of this process is that the actions of past life are concentrated and imprinted in the soul's archives to become seeds that will produce better fruits in the future. These seeds serve to bear fruit in the future character of future lives, at least to the extent that acquired characteristics and desires permit. For those who might object that it is impossible for the mind to grasp the events of an entire lifetime in the space of a moment, we would say to them that psychology will confirm that even on Earth this is possible. There are many recorded cases where a person falling into slumber has dreamt of events that occupied an apparent period of several years. In ordinary dreams, time practically shrinks to a small unit, and in the state we are speaking of, the process of concentration intensifies, and this single point in time covers the longest period of life. The soul carries in its dream state a concentrated record of its entire life, including the seeds of its desires, ambitions, likes and dislikes, attractions and repulsions. These ideas, these seeds, soon begin to germinate and produce flowers and fruits, not only in future incarnations, but also in the soul's life on the astral plane. Because benevolent nature does not forget to live and carries its tendencies into future incarnations, but also because many of these strong impulses persist on the astral plane, so that the soul can leave them behind when it is reborn into a new life on earth. And it is towards these fruits that the soul's sleep serves. During the soul's sleep, the soul prepares for its entry into manifestation and astral life, details of which we will see as we progress. Soul sleep is as necessary for the soul at this stage of its progress as is the sleep of the fetus in its mother's womb. We have heard of some irrational individuals who, upon becoming familiar with this, manifest a fear of the soul's sleep and say they fear this sleep in an unknown place, among so many unknown things and creatures. The objection seems very childish to the advanced occultist because he knows that there is no place in nature where an entity is as carefully and completely protected as in the case of the sleeping soul in the great astral plane. These sleeping souls are so secure against any invasion or intrusion, against any harm or hurtful influence, that it would take a complete revolution of the most sacred laws of nature to affect them. Their abode is not a place, remember, but a condition or state, and that state or condition is such that no malevolent or harmful influence could in any way reach them or even approach them. May we all be as well protected in earthly life as these sleeping souls. It seems that all the forces of nature would conspire to preserve them. The gods on their lofty thrones have no power or dominion over the sleeping souls, for those whose ideas on the subject of the afterlife have been so influenced by the teachings of current theology that this conception of soul sleep may seem strange and unusual to them. We would say that a little reflection will show them that even under popular conceptions, and even in the most favorable theologies, there are many veiled allusions to this. blessed state of rest that the soul so sorely needs after an exhausting life and before another. He gives sleep to those he loves. Behold, children are an inheritance from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. He has gone to his long rest, and many other familiar expressions and quotations seek to express the innate idea implanted in the human mind concerning a period of rest that will come to the tired soul. The idea of rest after the stress and storms of life is so natural and instinctive that it can be said to represent the greatest inclination and conviction of the human soul regarding the idea of death, as inward as the conviction of a future life beyond the grave. However, it is only in advanced occult teachings that we find the explanation of this idea. The soul that learns about the existence and nature of this period of soul sleep will find nothing but satisfaction in contemplating it. It will learn to regard this stage of its future existence as a balm and a blessed comfort. It will feel towards this state what we find expressed in the words of the old song. And I sleep peacefully and calmly cradled in the depth's crib, resting safely in the bosom of the great ocean of life. Rest, calm, peace, safety, protection. This is the condition of soul sleep on the astral plane. The awakening of the soul involves a great difference in the time required for the development of different souls in soul sleep. Some remain in this state for a very short time, while souls with a higher degree of realization require much more time in soul sleep. Here too we find a notable correspondence with the phenomenon of gestation and birth in the material plane, which must be considered by the student. For example, in animals whose natural lifespan is short, we see that as a rule, their gestation period in the womb is correspondingly short. On the other hand, animals with a long natural lifespan spend a much longer period in the womb before birth. Thus, an elephant spends 20 or 21 months in the womb, a human being 9 months, rabbits 1 month, guinea pigs 3 weeks. Each one's natural life is directly related to the gestation period. Similarly, the gestation period on the astral plane, the period of soul sleep, varies in proportion to the time the awakened soul will spend on the astral plane. An apparent exception to this rule is found in the case of individuals with very advanced spiritual power and knowledge, in whom the soul is capable, through its knowledge and power, of largely controlling natural processes instead of being controlled by them. The difference in the period of soul sleep in different cases arises from the fact that the soul during its sleep period deposits the lower parts of its mental nature, as well as its astral body, layer by layer, only removing them when it has reached the appropriate plane level according to its stage of development. A soul of low development has very little to change or abandon in this manner, and it wakes up in a lower plane. A soul of greater development, on the contrary, must change and abandon layer after layer of its lower mental and animal nature before it can wake up in the plane of its highest realization. When we say change or abandon, we rather refer to the preparation for change or abandonment, as the actual process of changing or abandoning these lower fragments of personality occurs immediately after the first stage of awakening, as we will see in the following paragraph. The soul, sensing the impulses of its life awakening once again, moves slowly and languidly, as one does when waking up from a deep sleep in earthly life. Then, like the butterfly shedding its chrysalis, it leaves the astral body and, in rapid succession, unconsciously discards the lower principles of its nature. This takes little time and happens as the soul slowly regains consciousness at the moment of real awakening. At that moment, the soul is freed from all those worn-out shells and obstacles, and it opens its eyes to the scenes of its new activities and existences in the astral world. Each soul is destined to dwell in the plane of what is highest and best in itself, after the dross of its lower elements has been cast off. It wakes up in the plane where the highest and best of itself has the opportunity to develop and flourish. The soul can, and often does, make tremendous progress in the astral plane, and during its stay there, it can shed more of its lower nature, thus moving to increasingly higher planes or subplanes. It is a magnificent fact that the soul dwells in the plane of its highest and best being. The student immediately recognizes that this fulfills the soul's desire and heart's aspiration. Often there is something in each of us that is much higher and better than what our daily life and actions reveal. The environment and material circumstances tend to delay and hinder the expression of what is best in us. In many cases, it is therefore comforting to know that on the other side, the soul is freed from everything that tends to hold it back and drag it down, and it is free to express and develop those qualities and characteristics that represent the best and truest in it. This fact agrees not only with the sense of justice and fairness, not only with the aspirations and desires of the captive soul, but also with the facts and principles of evolution, always drawing upward and forward, towards a distant goal of fulfillment and perfection. As the soul moves to the plane of its future activities, it has already shed its astral body, this strange counterpart of the physical body that was shed earlier. Now the soul no longer bears the form and figure of the human being, but it is something of a much higher order of being to which the terms form and figure do not apply. Our physical bodies and their astral counterparts are the result of physical evolution and are nothing more than the bodies of developed animals. The soul in higher planes does not need arms or legs, hands or feet. It dwells where these instruments are not needed, corresponding to a lower form of expression. It is a being that transcends the limitations of physical life. The rejected mental principles soon resolve into their original elements. The rejected astral body becomes what is known as the astral shell, and abandoned by its former occupant, it sinks by what could be called astral gravity to the lower planes of the astral, where it slowly disintegrates. The lower planes of the astral are full of these rejected astral shells floating in the astral atmosphere. They are not pleasant to behold. Unfortunately, the soul on the other side is not a witness to them, as it dwells in a plane far above that region. However, people on earthly life who engage in psychic practices before understanding the first principles of psychic science often find themselves on the lower planes of the astral plane and are thus witnesses to very unpleasant places in that region, as one would expect. It is worth noting that the plane where the soul wakes up is not a place but a state or condition of existence, a degree on the scale of vibrational energies of the spiritual world. As we said, each soul wakes up in the plane that represents its highest level, and it dwells in that plane during its stay in the astral plane, except when it develops and moves to an even higher plane, or when it is sometimes tempted by the seductions of the flesh and feels drawn to the memories of the lower principles, thus descending to a lower plane, where it finds more pleasant company and environment. Naturally, there is a great difference between the different planes and sub-planes of the astral plane. Some are very close to the lower scenes of earthly life, while others express the highest concepts of the human soul. Each one attracts to itself those who are prepared to dwell in its region, those whose better and higher parts correspond to the new environment. But the best and highest of the soul of lower or inferior development is very little above the thoughts and actions of daily life of that same soul in the body. People of low spiritual development must go through many periods of purification and development before they can escape the allure and seduction of the material world. There are souls so inclined to the earth, so hypnotized by the low pleasures of earthly life, that on the other side they refuse even to abandon their astral shells. In fact, they choose to remain in these worn-out shells for as long as they last, even during their disintegration, and they maintain their connection with the scenes and knowledge of the previous life. Others find themselves on planes where there is a conflict between the upward attraction of the higher things of spiritual life and the lower things of the material world. They lead a more or less unbalanced life in the astral plane, at least for a time, until a stronger attraction is revealed, causing them to rise and fall on the spiritual scale accordingly. Others find themselves on a plane where there is little or no attraction from the material world, and for them, astral life is lived in advancement, development, and fuller expression of their higher and better being. The awakening of the soul resembles a new birth, an entry into a new world of experience. The soul does not manifest fear of its new environment, but is full of activities aimed at expressing and manifesting its new powers. There is much to occupy the soul, as we will see as we progress. It is not alone or in solitary places, for it has the company of those who are in harmony and sympathy with it, and it is free from the absence of harmony and friction that occurs when associating with those of a different nature. Here it finds opportunities for the maximum expression of its activities and desires, and especially in the higher planes, it finds life much happier than in the material plane. Only souls of lower development, those poor creatures attached to the earth, are unhappy because they are deprived of what gives them pleasure, earthly things. Even in their cases, sometimes, there is at least something resembling happiness. After the sleep of the soul, it wakes up to life, but not in a region of death, just as the butterfly spreads its wings and enjoys its new state of existence without lamenting the loss of the form and life of the chrysalis. In the following chapters, we will examine in more detail the nature and incidents of this new life. Chapter 8. Geography of the Astral Plane. Before considering the experiences of the disembodied soul that has just awakened, let us take a moment to examine what could be called the geography of the astral plane, this great stage or plane of activities of the disembodied souls of the human race. This is the logical approach to the subject, for before we are asked to consider the inhabitants of a new country, we generally acquaint ourselves with the country itself, its hills and valleys, its rivers and plains, its highlands and lowlands. Let us use the same method, and now take a little lesson in the geography of the astral plane, the abode of disembodied souls. But first, let me remind once again that the astral plane is not a country. It is not a place at all in the usual sense. Its dimensions are not those of space, but those of vibration. In a way, one could say that the dimensions of the astral plane are the dimensions of time, for vibrations can only be measured by their rate of movement, and this rate is determined solely in terms of time. The same holds true for all vibrations, whether they be astral energy or lower forms of energy. The vibrations of light are measured in terms of time, that is, so many vibrations per second, and so on. The higher occultists like to tell the truth about the highest forms of vibration by saying that there was a vibration frequency so infinitely rapid that it seemed absolutely motionless and immutable. From this point, we gradually descend until we reach the coarsest forms of matter, and there we find a vibration frequency so slow that it seems also motionless. The substance of the astral plane is of course much finer than that of the material plane. Its vibrations are much higher than those of the highest forms of material substance. However, there is a very wide range between the vibrations of the lowest and those of the highest planes. In fact, the difference between the lowest plane of the astral and the highest of the material plane is less than the difference between the lowest and highest of the astral. Thus, between these two extremes of astral vibrations, we have the same vast territory that we would have in the material plane, with the difference that the material territory is measured by the dimensions of space, whereas that of the astral must be measured solely in terms of vibration or time, not space. For example, when traveling in the material plane, one must traverse space in feet, yards, or miles. But in the astral plane, when traveling, one traverses rates of vibrations, that is, one moves from a higher to a lower rate of vibration, or vice versa. And these various planes or subplanes of vibratory energy constitute the geographical features of the astral plane. There are countless planes and subplanes, or regions of the astral plane, that can be explored, but all astral travels are simply accomplished by passing from one degree of vibration to another. To use a crude metaphor, one could say that it is somewhat like going from the state of ice to that of water, and then to that of vapor. Or again, one could consider that one goes from ordinary atmospheric air to liquid air and then to solid air. This last possibility is theoretically conceivable, although science has not yet succeeded in solidifying air. These illustrations are of course very simplistic, but they may help to understand the geography of the astral plane a little better. From now on, we will talk about travels in the astral plane, that is, travels between the different astral planes and subplanes, as if it were happening on the material plane. In other words, instead of saying that the soul passes from one state of vibration to another, we will say that it moves from one subplane or plane to another, using the same terms you would use to describe a journey on the material plane. This will simplify things and avoid unnecessary repetition of what has been said regarding vibratory conditions or states. With this understanding, let us now proceed. There are many states or conditions of existence in the astral plane that are designated as planes and subplanes. These planes and subplanes are inhabited by souls prepared or adapted to reside in the particular series of planes or subplanes where they awaken after the sleep of the soul. The subtle principles of soul attraction draw each soul to the particular place for which it is prepared. The great law of attraction operates infallibly. Here there is no possibility or chance in the mechanism of the law of attraction. The law operates with absolute precision and uniformity, making no mistakes. Each soul is limited in its range by its own inherent limitations and degrees of development. No astral police force is needed to keep disembodied souls in the places that correspond to them. It is impossible for the disembodied soul to travel to planes above its own immediate series. The law of vibration prevents it. On the other hand, any soul can, if it chooses, freely visit the planes and subplanes below its own series, and freely observe the scenery and phenomena of the lower planes, and mingle with the inhabitants of those planes. This is entirely distinct from the higher form of telepathic communication that prevails among disembodied souls on the astral plane. It is a very wise provision of the law, for otherwise the higher planes would be open to the influence of those who inhabit the lower planes, and the life and development of the soul would be disturbed, just as a class in a philosophy school might be disrupted by a gang of toughs from the suburbs of a large city. It must be remembered that the astral plane has its slums and toughs, just as there are on the material plane. In an earlier work, we presented a somewhat crude but nevertheless very suggestive illustration of this subject of intercommunication between the various planes and subplanes of the astral plane, which we reproduce as follows. It is absolutely impossible for a soul to go beyond the plane to which it belongs. Even though those from higher planes can freely visit lower planes, this remains a rule of the astral plane, not an arbitrary law, but a law of nature. If the student can forgive the common comparison, he can understand the subject by imagining a large screen or series of screens, like those used to sort coal by size. The large coal is retained by the first screen, the next size by the second, and so on until the fine coal is reached. Now, the large coal cannot enter the receptacle of the smaller sizes, but the smaller sizes can easily pass through the screen and join the larger sizes if forced. In the same way, on the astral plane, the soul with the most materiality and the grossest nature is stopped by the screen of a certain degree or plane, and it cannot pass to higher planes, whereas a soul that has passed the higher planes, having shed more layers of imprisonment, can easily pass back and forth between the lower planes if it wishes. In fact, souls often do so in order to visit friends on the lower planes, and give them pleasure and comfort, and in the case of a highly developed soul, it can offer much spiritual assistance in this way, through counsel and instruction. When the soul is on the lower plane, to return to the passage mentioned earlier, we give the following words, which should also be repeated here, as they relate to the geography of the astral plane. We refer to the following. The only exception to the rule of free passage to planes below that of the particular soul is that which prevents souls from lower planes from entering the plane of sleeping souls, a plane that cannot be accessed by souls that have awakened in a lower plane, but which can be freely accessed by those pure and exalted souls that have reached a high place. The plane of the sleep of the soul is sacred to those who occupy it, and to the higher souls we have just mentioned, and its nature is in fact that of a distinct and separate state, not that of one of the great series of planes and subplanes. There are as many types of different regions in the astral plane as there are in the material plane, and each plane is inhabited exactly by the class of souls that is expected to attract. There are the abodes of degraded souls, imbued with materiality and animality, which would be a veritable hell for a soul of greater accomplishment. One can imagine that the soul with higher impulses has no desire to travel into these depths of the astral, unless it is a highly developed soul willing to descend into hell to meet the needs of a lower soul, striving to emerge from the turmoil into which earthly life has thrown it. Such ministering spirits exist and perform this work for their lower brothers and sisters. But as a rule, disembodied souls prefer to develop their own evolution in their own plane, so that they can ascend to higher rungs of spiritual opportunity in their next incarnation and acquire spiritual knowledge during their stay on their particular astral plane. 9 primitive states of the soul. Cultured and refined men and women generally smile at the traditions of primitive peoples concerning the heavens and may perhaps feel a sense of pity for the humble ideals of barbarous and semi-barbarous human races as they manifest in their primitive conceptions of the celestial world. However, the experienced occultist, in turn, smiles at the peremptory complacency of many civilized individuals who speak condescendingly of these modest ideals and conceptions, for the occultists know that these conceptions have a basis of reality in the lives of primitive peoples on the astral plane. Just as the future condition of the individual is largely determined by the nature, character, and strength of their desires, so too is their life on the astral plane largely determined by their ideal desires. The astral plane gives free expression to the ideals that the individual has in earthly life, and it can be considered a reflection of those ideals on the astral plane. Our ideals tend towards real manifestation, and this is true not only for lofty ideals, but also for the lowest. Understanding this fact, one will see that it is a logical necessity that the astral existence of primitive peoples is a reflection of the ideals and desires they had during the period of their earthly life, a dramatization of their desires and ideals from their past life. In summary, the Indian truly finds his happy hunting grounds and other primitive peoples their particular paradise, as evidenced by their creeds and beliefs. Initially, this may seem shocking to someone whose ideals of heaven are modeled after the realm of golden paved streets where milk and honey flow, but a little reflection will show that the conception of golden paved streets is only a little higher in the scale than the happy hunting grounds, for it is purely material and reflects the ideals of a race that desires shiny and expensive things. If one considers the emotional and intellectual nature of the primitive person, one will see that surrounding a soul thus with the environment of the civilized and cultured person would make them very unhappy. Indeed, such a heaven would seem like hell to them. Just imagine a savage on earthly life placed in a palace with its environment suited to the ideals of a person of high culture and refinement to understand how truly miserable they would be. The same is true on the astral plane. Nature is kind to the savage as well as to the cultured person, providing them with the environment in which they will feel most at home and where they will find the best opportunity for self-expression. This does not mean that there is a series of scenarios and environments elaborated for the tastes of every type of soul on the astral plane. On the contrary, there are no scenarios here. Here is the secret. There are no scenarios on the astral plane, except those provided by the thought forms of the souls who inhabit it. Each soul carries with it its own set of scenarios in its imaginative mental faculties. It follows, of course, that many souls with the same ideals and general tastes inhabiting the same subplane will carry the same mental landscape with them. As the power of thought transfer manifests strongly on the astral plane, each soul affects the general scenario of the others. In fact, the landscape of each subplane or division represents the compounded ideals and mental images of those who inhabit it. In earthly life, the environment largely makes the person. On the astral plane, the person creates their own environment according to the absolute and unvarying laws of nature. The Indian, during the short period of their stay on the astral plane, finds themselves surrounded by everything that makes their life pleasant and harmonious. The clairvoyants among the ancient Native Americans, who were able to penetrate the lower planes of the astral plane, were right when they spoke of the existence of happy hunting grounds for their deceased brethren on the other side. The reports of the dark forms communicating with their ancient brethren on earth were also true. In the same vein, the celestial world of the Native American was precisely as their shamans had taught them. Thus, a soul emerging from the sleep of the soul would find themselves perfectly at home, surrounded by everything that made their life pleasant: vast forests and plains, streams and rivers, plenty of buffalo and deer to hunt, and plenty of fish to catch. All these connections existed for them, but they existed only mentally. For such a soul, these things seemed like a very intense dream, but they never understood that it was simply a dream. Dreams are true as long as they last, ancient writings tell us, and in this regard,
The wisest of the race tells us that the phenomenal universe truly has the nature of a dream of the absolute, but it is no less real to us. Even in earthly life, we sometimes experience dreams so real that we suffer or enjoy with the same intensity or enthusiasm as if they were only slightly more substantial realities of the waking state. Those who have studied the subject inform us that among all races, there are many reports from clairvoyants, visionaries, dreamers, and communicators with deceased souls that positively affirm the existence of heavens exactly in line with the religious teachings of their tribe or race. No matter how crude and barbarous these conceptions may seem to a more cultivated faith, it is very easy to dismiss these reports as mere inventions or as dreams of those priests. However, a closer
examination will reveal the fact that there is a surprising basic unity among them. They all agree on the fundamental points, though they differ in details. The occultist knows that all these reports are true as far as they go, and are based on real physical experiences of certain members of the tribe or people. Though they differ greatly in details, they agree on the fundamentals, and all are based on truth. A little consideration of the nature of astral phenomena, as we have said, will explain the subject. These primitive souls spend a brief existence in the lower astral planes to which they have been connected, and develop newer and fuller ideals and desires that will flourish and bear fruit in their next earthly incarnation. On the other hand, they exhaust and leave behind some of their baser desires and ideals, thus paving the way for spiritual evolution that always seeks to unfold. On the astral plane, this serves to have these souls develop a little, only a little, it's true, but every small step is a gain. Moreover, as astral life, and generally the earthly life of the savage, is relatively short, these souls actually progress considerably within a determined time frame. They may live 100 lives on Earth and the corresponding astral life, whereas a more developed soul finds its spiritual rest in the higher astral planes. Here lies compensation and equity, as everywhere else in the processes of life. One of the great accomplishments of the savage soul on the astral plane is the development of camaraderie and feelings of comradeship. This is caused by the soul reuniting with its friends from earthly life and the joy experienced there. Furthermore, the animosities of earthly life are softened by the nature of life on the astral plane, for with an abundant supply of everything the savage soul desires, there are much fewer opportunities than on Earth for jealousy and rivalry. As a result, hatred is pacified, and elementary camaraderie and friendship are encouraged, friendships of universal love. Each journey on the astral plane eliminates a little more of the lower nature and awakens a little more of the higher nature. Otherwise, there would be no progress in repeated lives. Every soul, however undeveloped, learns a little more of that sense of unity and uniqueness each time it is relieved from the stress of the physical body. Thus, we can see that even in these rudimentary heavens of primitive peoples, there exists opportunity and certainty of progress. Happiness begets love, and the soul responds to the stimulus. The primitive soul stays but a short time on the astral plane to which it is attached, and quickly exhausts its limited opportunity. Even though for the soul itself, eternities may seem to have passed, it soon feels the drowsiness of the sleep preceding the rebirth that corresponds to it, and falling into a state of coma, it awaits the attraction of karma, which soon leads it to a new body to study again the lessons of life, and to live and survive what it finds in itself. Earthly life is strong in such a soul, and the law of attraction quickly brings it back to earthly scenes. There is no injustice or harshness in this. Each soul gets what it desires most and what it desires most. The law of compensation is fully in force here as elsewhere, and eternal justice reigns. All is well, even with souls as humble as these. Way 10. Astral religious experiences. For the student of comparative religions, the fact that from the primitive treasure trove of religious beliefs emerge an almost countless number of creeds, sects, and divisions of religious thought is surprising. From the very primitive superstitions of simple races to the more advanced conceptions of cultured peoples, there is a common thread of fundamental belief in something that is above the phenomenal universe and is the causeless cause of the universe. With this conception, we find the fundamental belief that the soul survives after the death of the body, But this conception is also interpreted diversely by different authorities and religious sects. In general, humanity's fundamental religious instinct maintains that the future life of the soul depends on the character and actions of the person during their life on Earth. The journey is long from some of the most primitive interpretations of these three fundamental principles of religious belief to this elevated conception of advanced occultists, which has been declared by a talented author as follows. There are three truths that are absolute and cannot be lost, but which may remain silent for lack of being said. First, the soul of man is immortal, and its future is the future of a something whose growth and splendor have no limit. Second, the principle which gives life dwells in us and without us is eternal and eternally beneficent. It is neither heard nor seen nor felt, but is perceived by the one who desires it. Third, each individual is his own and absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to himself. He decrees his life, his reward, his punishment. These truths, grand as they are as simple as the simplest mind of the human being. Feed the hungry with them, and every conception and all the various degrees that appear in them result from man's intuitive perception of this something, the immortality of the soul, and the law of karma. The difference between the various forms of religious thought lies simply in the differences in the conceptions of truth formed by the minds of various religious leaders or teachers and their disciples. All religious creeds and dogmas are created by man, as the enemies of revealed religion maintain. However, these good people lose the other half of the truth, namely that under the creeds and dogmas created by man, there eternally exists humanity's intuition of the existence of truth. The mind may not be able to interpret the intuitive perception correctly, but it is positively impressed by the fact that truth exists. Man has made a god of almost everything in the material world, and has bowed down and worshipped his own creation, this because of his limited power of interpretation. But the stick or the stone, the carved image or the anthropomorphic deities, unconsciously and in reality, adored this something that was the cause of religious intuition within himself. And as beautifully declared by one of the Hindu Vedas, the Supreme accepts all this worship when it is honestly directed towards him. The truth is that, although humans call him by many names, said the old sage Yogi of past centuries, each individual creates for himself and maintains the particular form of religious faith that best suits the requirements of his soul at any particular period of his evolution. When he is ready for a higher conception, he abandons and rejects the old belief and enthusiastically embraces the new. The world has witnessed many cases of this evolution of religious thought, and indeed, it is happening significantly right now. The path of the race is strewn with broken and abandoned idols, material and mental, which were once precious to millions of faithful. And as the race progresses, many more idols will be overturned and collapse along the path of time. But each idol had its appropriate place in the overall history of the race's evolution of religious thought. Each served its purpose, and its ideals served to help humanity in its perpetual and eternal journey towards absolute truth. In view of the above, one should naturally not expect to find a rational and equitable adjustment of conditions on the other side, a provision for sincere religious beliefs and convictions of the race that differ as much as these religions and beliefs do. Imagine the spiritual anguish of an incorporeal soul if it saw the precious beliefs of a sincere life and the traditions of many generations of its ancestors swept away as by a flood. This would be cruelty to the incorporeal soul, as much as if it were done to it during its life on earth. There is a popular belief that the incorporeal soul magically transforms and instantly passes from ignorance to absolute knowledge when crossing over. This is a childish belief, and in reality it has no basis. There is very little difference in the general intelligence or spiritual realization of the soul before or after death. The progress of the soul is gradual within or outside the body. The incorporeal soul is practically the same in intelligence and general characteristics inside and outside the body. Inside and outside the body are just successive phases of its continuous life, succeeding each other like day and night, summer and winter. Therefore, what is true of the feelings and emotions of a particular soul on earth is almost equally true of the same things in its astral life. We mention this for a better understanding of what we have been aiming for in the preceding pages of this chapter. As a result, what one might naturally expect to find according to reason and fairness regarding the religious experiences of the incorporeal soul is indeed the case, namely that on the astral plane, each soul is enveloped by a religious environment consistent with the best of its beliefs in its life on earth. Not only will it find the particular heavens or hells it expected to find, but it will also be in contact with other souls holding similar beliefs and with the wise prophets and founders of its own religion. But this environment will be like a mirage, for it is a product of human thought and has no counterpart in the absolute facts of nature. The thought forms of a particular form of religious belief gather great force on the astral plane and support with all the appearance of permanent reality the perception and understanding of the believer and devotee, even if they are totally invisible to those of a different faith. The presence of the prophets and founders remains with the environment, even though the souls of these individuals have long passed to other planes of life. The astral plane is a realm of ideals, and each soul finds its ideals realized in this regard. The good Christian finds a manifestation of the best in his own creed and beliefs, and rests fully assured of having professed the true faith and reaping the reward he hoped for. But the same is true for the good Brahmin, the good Muslim, or the good Confucian. Moreover, each particular sect or division of religious beliefs finds confirmation of its own beliefs on the astral plane. But there are no sect or religious wars. Each soul finds its own and is estranged from others. But it should be noted, and as beautifully said by one of the Hindu Vedas, the Supreme accepts all this worship when it is honestly directed towards him. The truth is that although humans call him by many names, said the old sage Yogi of past centuries, each individual creates for himself and maintains the particular form of religious faith that best suits the requirements of his soul at any particular period of his evolution. When he is ready for a higher conception, he abandons and rejects the old belief and enthusiastically embraces the new. The world has witnessed many cases of this evolution of religious thought, and indeed an important event is currently unfolding in this regard. The path of the race is strewn with broken and abandoned idols, material and mental, which were once precious to millions of faithful. As the race progresses, many more idols will be overturned and collapse along the path of time, but each idol had its appropriate place in the overall history of the race's evolution of religious thought. Each served its purpose, and its ideals served to help humanity in its perpetual and eternal journey towards absolute truth. In consideration of the above, one should not naturally expect to find a rational and equitable adaptation of conditions on the other side, a provision for sincere beliefs and religious convictions of the race, which differ as much as these religions and beliefs do. Imagine the spiritual anguish of an incorporeal soul if it saw the precious beliefs of a sincere life and the traditions of many generations of its ancestors swept away as by a flood. This would be cruelty to the incorporeal soul as much as if it were done to it during its life on earth. There is a popular belief that the incorporeal soul magically transforms and instantly passes from ignorance to absolute knowledge when crossing over. This is a childish belief, and in reality it has no basis. It would be difficult to categorize as criminal the fox that steals a chicken or the cunning cat that laps milk from the bowl on the table. There are many individuals whose moral sense of right and wrong is little higher than that of the aforementioned animals. Thus, even human law, at least theoretically, aims not to punish but to restrain through example and precept. In connection with the thought expressed in the previous paragraph, let us remember that absolute justice does not occur in punishment, as we have said, at least theoretically. Even human law does not seek to punish the criminal, but simply to achieve the following objectives. 1. To serve as a warning to others not to commit a similar crime. 2. To prevent the criminal from committing further offenses by confining him or imposing other deterrent sanctions. 3. To reform the criminal by showing the benefits of right actions and the disadvantages of wrong actions. This holds true even for finite human law. What should we expect from infinite cosmic law in this regard? Certainly nothing more or less than a discipline encouraging the development of the soul's good qualities and the elimination of the bad. And this is precisely what exists on the astral plane, according to the advanced occultist. In relation to this, it must be remembered that the discipline that is most appealing to the soul with modest ideals would be useless in the case of the educated soul, and vice versa. In summary, it can be truthfully said that the nature of appropriate discipline in each individual case is well expressed by the ideal of heaven and hell, accepted by the individual on earth, and this ideal naturally remains with the soul after it has left the body for the astral plane. The minds of some individuals are entirely satisfied with the idea of a lake of sulfur for sinners and a pleasant abode in heaven with streets of gold, a harp, and a halo for the blessed. Others who have progressed far beyond this stage after abandoning the old ideas of a heaven in space and a hell of torment think that supreme happiness for them would be a state or condition where they could see their ideals become reality, their highest goals achieved, their dreams fulfilled, and their greatest punishment, a condition where they could pursue to its logical conclusion the evil they have done. And both classes of souls find in the astral plane the heavens and hells they have thought of, for both have created their heaven or hell from the material of their own inner consciousness. These mental conceptions lack no reality for those who are conscious of them. Joy and suffering lose nothing of their effect due to the absence of the physical body on the astral plane. The sinner who believes that a hell of sulfur and flames awaits him because of his crimes in his earthly days will not be disappointed. His beliefs provide the necessary environment, and his conscience condemns him to the punishment he believes in. Even if he has tried not to believe in these things using his reason, he still retains the subconscious memories of childhood teachings or the traditions of his race. He will find himself in the same condition, suffer the traditional tortures and sufferings, all in his imagination, of course, until he receives a valuable disciplinary lesson whose faint memories will haunt him in the next incarnation. This is, of course, an extreme case. There are many other degrees of hells brought onto the astral plane by souls with various shades of religious beliefs. Each receives the punishment that best suits to influence and have a deterrent effect on it in its next life. The same holds true for the ideal of heaven. The soul will find the bliss of the blessed according to its own ideals, for the good deeds and acts that figure in the infallible books of its memory, to the extent that no soul has been entirely bad or absolutely good. It follows that each soul can experience both reward and punishment according to its merits, as determined by its awakened conscience, or, in other words, conscience establishes an average that corresponds in detail with the soul's predominant belief. Those who in earthly life have deliberately convinced themselves that there is no afterlife for the soul have a particular experience. They find themselves with those of their kind in a plane where they imagine they have been transported to another planet, and they are still in the flesh and participate in a great drama of karma. They suffer the miseries they have caused to others and enjoy the blessings they have bestowed on others. They are not punished for their disbelief, which would be an unthinkable injustice, but they learn the lesson of good and evil in their own way. This experience itself is purely mental and simply results from the expression in the astral manifestation of the memories of their earthly life, stimulated by the awakened conscience that gives them an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Belief or disbelief in a future state does not alter the cosmic law of astral compensation and purification. The laws of karma cannot be overcome by refusing to believe in the afterlife or by refusing to admit the distinction between good and evil. Every human being has, however superficial it may seem, an intuitive realization of the soul's survival, and each has a deep conscience of some kind of moral code. These subconscious beliefs and opinions emerge at the astral level. Advanced souls who have given us the best and highest reports of the soul's life on the other side agree that the highest happiness and deepest sorrow of the incorporeal soul of intelligent and cultured beings come, in the former case, from perceiving the effect of the good actions and thoughts of their life on earth, and in the latter case, from a similar perception of the results of the bad thoughts and actions of their life on earth. When the eyes of the soul clear and can discern the entanglement of cause and effect, and follow each particular thread within it, It has within itself a heaven and a hell of greater intensity than anything Dante could have dreamed of. For the incorporeal soul, there is no joy comparable to that experienced in perceiving the results of a right action, and there is no sorrow equal to that of perceiving the result of an evil action, with the repugnant thought that it could have been otherwise. But even all these things pass for the soul. In fact, they often occupy only a moment of time that seems like eternity to the soul. There is no eternal happiness or eternal pain on the astral plane. These things pass, and the soul emerges once again into earthly life to enroll again in the school of life, in God's nursery, to learn and relearn its lessons. And always remember that both the heaven and the hell of each soul reside within itself. Each soul creates its own heaven and its own hell, for neither has any objective existence. The heaven and hell of each soul are the result of its karma and are purely a mental creation of its own being. Though the phenomenon is no less real for the soul, nothing in its earthly life could seem more real to it. And again, remember that heaven and hell on the astral plane are not given as reward or bribe, or as respective punishment, but simply as a natural means of developing and unfolding the higher qualities and restricting the lower, so that the soul may progress on the path. Thus, once again, we see the previous assertion in the words quoted at the beginning of this chapter. On the astral plane, every individual is their own absolute legislator, the dispenser of glory or sorrow for themselves. It is they who decree their life, their reward, their punishment. But life on the astral plane is not only about heavens and hells. There are joys experienced there that have nothing to do with the good or bad deeds of earthly life, but which result from the impulse to express one's own creative faculties and to exercise the intellect with greater power. The joys of expression and knowledge beyond what any mortal could hope to experience. In our next chapter, we will examine these phases of life on the astral plane. Astral self-expression. One of the saddest features of earthly life is the fact that we are unable to fully express the creative impulse, the artistic impulse, the genius within us that struggles to manifest. After reaching a certain point on the scale of life, the evolving soul finds within itself the ever-present impulse of something within it, striving to express itself and unfold in objective manifestation. This may be the desire to express oneself in art, music, literature, invention, or perhaps the persistent desire to work, to reshape the affairs of the world, to bring them closer to the soul's desire. In all these cases, what is really at work is the creative impulse, which strives to give. Objective form to things according to the pattern or design within the soul, and for this expression, the head, the heart, and the hands are eager to work. But unfortunately, very few are able to realize in earthly life 1/10 of what the soul dreams. The artistic instinct is always eager to realize perfect expression, and yet receives only the crumbs that fall from the table. The soul is always thirsty for progress and achievement, and yet receives only the few drops that fall from the source. If this single life were all that exists, if these aspirations, desires, cravings, hunger, and thirst of the soul depended solely on the possibility in a single earthly life, then the pessimistic cry would be justified, and the howl of the discouraged would be justified, for in reality, these impulses and desires are nothing but the impulse of the seed striving to break its shell so that it can produce stem, branch, flower, and fruit. The seed cannot become flower and fruit as long as it is on earth, but, as the advanced occultist well knows, these seed desires are nothing but the promise of future flowers and fruits. The mere fact of their existence is proof of possibility, that is, of the certainty of their realization. Rather than being a cause for discouragement, they must be regarded as a prophecy of future achievements. It has been well said that in every aspiration resides the certainty of its own realization. These words seem mockery to many, and indeed, it would be mockery if the possibility of realization were limited to earthly life, especially in which they manifest. But for the soul that has sufficiently progressed on the path of fulfillment and can look back and down on the planes of life below it, it sees that these efforts of genius to express itself are nothing but the pains of the soul's labor, which must precede the future birth of the fruit of genius on the astral plane. These seeds of genius produce stem and branch and are ready for the flower and fruit of future incarnations. In the highly concentrated state of mind at certain phases of astral life, the talents and genius of the individual grow and develop very rapidly. The next incarnation finds the individual ready and prepared to manifest the power he has generated during his stay in the astral. It can be said that the soul receives and stores energy during its stay in the astral, which will enable it to manifest powers hitherto unimaginable in the next earthly life. A familiar example is that of the child learning to skate, who discovers they make little progress during the afternoon. They go to bed that night and forget all about skating, but when they return to the task the next day, they find they have made wonderful progress. Many of us have had similar experiences with our small tasks in life. We find that something happens to us while we sleep. The secret of the mentioned phenomena is that during the child's sleep, their subconscious or instinctive mind repeats the task until they make much progress towards mastery, and the next day they put into practice what they learned overnight. But the conscious mind is not aware of the progression. There are depths of the mind that undertake these tasks while we sleep, and our objective conscious faculties rest, repair minor flaws in performance, and practice tasks to be accomplished the next day. Similarly, the supraconscious faculties, not the subconscious of the soul's mind, practice and become proficient in tasks of the next earthly life, as indicated by the impulse of desire and the pains of accomplishment seeking to make a difference. The soul is fully aware of the functioning of the supraconscious faculties, and indeed, it experiences great joy in the work of development and accomplishment. The celestial realm of those souls who have the desire to create, to execute, to do, is indeed a kingdom of happiness, for the soul finds itself capable of manifesting things that were beyond its reach during earthly life, and expressing itself to a degree almost beyond the dreams and dearest hopes of the soul on earth. And this expression and manifestation are accomplished by the simple love of execution, the joy of work, the ecstasy of creative achievement, rather than the hope of reward. Only on the astral plane can the soul find the conditions described in Kipling's verses. And only the Master shall praise us, blame us, and no one shall work for money, and no one shall work for fame, but each shall work for the joy of the work, and each shall carve their own separate star, make the thing as they see it, for the God of things as they are. The same holds true for the seeker of knowledge, the one for whom the exercise of intellect is the greatest joy. Such a person finds the books of knowledge open to many pages beyond where they were forced to stop in earthly life. The philosopher, the scientist, the metaphysician, the naturalist, these find complete exercise for their faculties on the astral plane. The library of the cosmos, the laboratories of the universe, are at their disposal, and they are welcomed. There, they find the desire of their heart accomplished in the opportunities offered to them on the astral plane, and return to earthly life when the time of reincarnation arrives, with a stimulated intellect and greater power of reasoning. What they have learned appears in the next life as intuition. It is well known to advanced occultists that great inventors such as Edison, great philosophers such as Hegel or Herbert Spencer, great scientists such as Darwin or Huxley, who apparently manifest an intuitive knowledge of their subjects, are only manifesting on the material plane what they have already acquired in the astral as the fruit of desires and efforts made in previous incarnations. The common experience of these geniuses, as reported in their biographies, is that most of their greatest discoveries come to them suddenly, as if from a clear sky. But the rule of nature is that there is no flower or fruit without a preceding seed. And this is true both on the mental and physical planes. There is always a cause to the effect. In these cases, the struggling genius, that is, the one who feels they could be a genius, if only what is inside could be expressed, would have their chance in the astral. And if the seed is well planted in a rich soil of the soul, then in the next incarnation, the flower and fruit will appear. Perhaps we can clarify this idea a bit more clearly by making the following comparison. 1. Earthly life is like the phase where the caterpillar crawls. It feels something within it that cannot be expressed and barely understands. 2. Astral life is like the phase of the chrysalis in which the future and magnificent butterfly forms, and where the colorful wings already exist astrally. 3. Reincarnated earthly life is like the phase of the butterfly where the ideal felt in the first stage and the mental experience in the second stage become completely manifest and active. The law of karma accomplishes much of its work on the astral plane, as there the material is plastic and non-resistant, the gross layers of the body being absent. This law is exact and infallible in its operations. It always brings the seed to bear its fruit, and each seed produces only the appropriate fruit. Karma is the entire sum of the soul, all that it has done, the thoughts it has had, the intertwining self. Only its laws endure. What you sow, you reap. See the fields beyond. The sesame was sesame, the corn was corn, silence and darkness knew it. Thus is born the destiny of a human being. They come to reap what they have sown. Sesame, corn, all that was sown during the past birth, and so many herbs and toxic things that spoil it, as well as the painful earth. If one works well to eliminate them, and to plant healthy things where they grew, the soil will be fertile, just and clean, and the harvest due to it will be abundant. Regarding the question of occupation in the heavenly world, the astral plane, the following quotation from a well-known writer on the subject, Alp Sinet, will be interesting and instructive. However, readers who accept that a view from heaven on earthly life will make happiness in heaven impossible might also doubt the possibility of true felicity in the monotonous isolation described now. The objection is simply made from the viewpoint of an imagination that cannot escape its current environment. To begin with, no one will complain about the greatest happiness they have known in life. Most people have had happy moments. In any case, those who look back for the purpose of this comparison, and even take one of those short instants or moments too short for us to suspect monotony, and imagine their immensely prolonged sensations without any ongoing external event to mark the passage of time. In such a state of affairs, there is no room for the concept of fatigue. The unchanged and unchanging sensation of continuous, intense felicity goes on indefinitely, but not eternally, for the causes that produced it are not infinite in themselves, but for long periods of time, until the effective impulse is exhausted. Another high authority on the subject cited by Sinet says that moral and spiritual qualities must find a field where their energies can expand. The higher astral plane is such a field. Thus, all the grand plans of moral reform, intellectual inquiry, abstract principles of nature, all the divine spiritual aspirations that fill the brightest part of life beyond, become reality. And the abstract entity is also occupied in this inner world, with its own preparation to enjoy the effects of the great and beneficial spiritual causes sown in life. One lives a pure existence, and spiritually conscious a dream of realistic vivacity until, having satisfied karma in this sense, the being progresses to their next era of causes, whether in this same world or another, according to their stage of progress. Thus there is a change of occupation, a continuous change in Dev Bhakan, for this dreamlike life is nothing but the fruit, the harvesting time of those psychic seeds fallen from the tree of existence during our moments of dreams and hopes, whimsical flashes of happiness stifled in an ungrateful social soil, blooming at the dawn of Dev Bhakan and ripening under its ever-fertile sky. If the individual had but one moment of ideal experience, even then, it could not be, as wrongly supposed, the indefinite prolongation of that unique moment. That single note played in life's anger will form the keynote of the subjective state of being and will develop into countless harmonic tones and semitones of psychic phantasmagoria. There, all unrealized hopes, aspirations and dreams become fully real, and objective dreams turn into realities of subjective existence. Beyond the veil of Maya, their vaporous and deceptive appearances are perceived by the initiate who has learned the great secret of how to penetrate so deeply into the arcana of being. The same authority continues to object to this by arguing that one is thus deceived by nature, and to call it a misleading sensation of enjoyment that has no reality is to show a total inability to understand the conditions of life and being outside of our material existence. For how can one make the same distinction in Dev Bakan, that is, outside the conditions of earthly life, between what we call a reality and a fictitious or artificial falsification of it? In our world, the same principle cannot apply to both sets of conditions. The spiritual soul has no substance and is not confined to a place with a limited horizon of perceptions around it. Thus, whether within or outside its mortal body, it is always distinct and free from its limitations. And if we call its experiences in Dev Bakan a deception of nature, then we should never allow ourselves to call reality any of those purely abstract feelings that belong entirely to our higher soul, and that are reflected and assimilated by it. For example, like an ideal perception of philanthropy, beautiful and deep love, just as any other purely spiritual sensation that fills our inner being with either immense pain or joy during life. Certainly, for the aspiring soul, there is greater felicity in conceiving a heavenly world where the problems of this life are resolved, a world where the creative impulse will have a full chance of development, for a newer and fuller future life that will give birth to flowers and fruits of heart's desires turned reality, ideals realized, than in conceiving a heaven where development and creative effort cease, where all is finished, where there is nothing to do or create, where there is no occupation but folding hands to enjoy the bliss of eternal idleness. The creative instinct springs from the very heart of nature, from the beat of its own vital blood, for nature is ever working, creating, making, executing, becoming, acting, achieving, forever and ever constantly rising higher and higher as the eons of time pass. Truly, this is life itself, and any other life is death in life, one where only ghosts reside, a breath, a sound, a voice, the tinkling of the camel bell. And yet, the world of humans is so based on materiality that they speak of the heavenly world of the higher astral plane as a mirage, a mere dream, a ghost. They consider nothing real unless it is material. Poor mortals, they fail to realize that in the end there can be nothing more unreal, more dreamlike, more transient, more ghostly than this world of material substance. They are not aware that there is absolutely no permanence in it, that the mind itself is not swift enough to grasp material reality, because before the mind can grasp a material fact, it has melted into something else. The world of spirit, and even more true, the world of spirit, is far more real than the world of materiality. From a spiritual perspective, nothing is real except the spirit, and matter is considered the most illusory and ephemeral of all illusory appearances. The higher the soul rises on the scale above the astral plane, the more real the experienced phenomenon becomes. Therefore, it follows that the experiences of the soul in the higher astral plane are not only unreal in nature, but in comparison, much more real than the experiences of life on material planes. As the writers we have just quoted have well said, nature is not deceived in the astral plane, but nature manifests itself with a much more real effect on this plane than on the material plane. This is a difficult saying for the uninitiated, but the advanced soul is increasingly convinced of its truth with every hour it lives. It is a grave mistake to consider the experiences of the soul in the heavenly world as little more than a play of reality, as some materialistic critics have described it. Just look at the experiences of earthly life to see that some of the best work in the world is done during the hours not devoted to actual work on things. There are moments in the daily life of the most active workers in the world that can be called the ideal period, that is, the time when the mind creates and shapes what then manifests in material form. No building, no bridge, nor any other great human work has been erected without first being created in the mind of one individual or several individuals. It first existed in the creative faculties of the mind. Material construction is simply the reproduction of mental creation. Remembering this, which should be considered the real creation, the mental or the material? The soul in its activities in the higher astral plane accomplishes a work similar to that of the inventor's, the designer's, the builder's mind, when it creates and conceives what will then be objectified in material form. This period or stage can be called the formation of the model or pattern that will then serve for material manifestation. Only ignorance can conceive a stage of existence as a mere dream. In truth, the scales of matter serve to blind the eyes of the human being so that they see the real, the unreal, and the unreal as the real. The higher the soul ascends on the scale of existence, the more real its experiences are. The more matter descends on the scale, the more unreal its experiences are. O Maya, Maya, mother of illusion, when will we learn to rise above your fate, those who play in the clay, covered by it, and cannot see anything finer and higher than their sticky substance? Heaven would seem a very dark and cold place to the average human soul. We are glad that the Yogi Masters have been very explicit and clear on this subject, and that their students can see that this hope and desire of the human heart find their full realization in life on the astral plane. Not only will we recognize it, but naturally we are bound by the astral bonds of attraction to those we love, and also to those with whom we sympathize. Even if we have never known them in earthly life, more than that exists on the astral plane. There is the possibility of much closer and intimate companionship among soulmates than what is generally observed in earthly life. By setting aside and rejecting the envelopes of the physical body, the soul becomes capable of having a much closer relationship with soulmates than it has ever experienced on the physical plane. Having burned in the astral fires the dross of lower attractions, the soul can function on much higher planes of association. On the astral plane, the soul can find other souls in close communion and camaraderie, and the dreams and aspirations of earthly life, which were impossible to achieve on this plane, now become the ordinary incidents of the soul's new life. What the soul desired in vain on earth now flourishes with the greatest richness. To understand what this means, just think of the highest ideals contemplated by the soul in earthly life regarding relationships between human beings. Although these ideals rarely materialize in earthly life, they remain constantly with the soul. It is one of the tragedies of earthly life that these ideals always seem too beautiful to be true. The love between man and woman of the right kind always has in the background this ideal affection and desire. And yet, how seldom does the ideal escape from being dragged in the mud? The relationship between parents and children, between brothers and sisters, between friends, rarely comes close to the ideal that dwells in the human heart. This ideal is so true, so constant in its presence, that when in earthly life we see a company that seems to meet, even partially, the ideal requirements, our deepest feelings are touched. In fiction, poetry, song, and drama, we find that the portrayal of this ideal touches sources of emotion and sympathy that elevate us to higher planes of thought and life. What, then, must be the joy, the happiness, the satisfaction of a life in a plane of being where this expression is the only natural one, and where the ideal becomes real in expression? Yes, indeed, we shall recognize ourselves there, not only the other person we might have in mind, but also many others with whom we are in natural soul harmony. Those who are united by the bond of love, relationship, and friendship on earth, as long as there is any degree of attachment between them, have the opportunity to manifest their mutual affection and harmonious attraction on the higher astral plane. The highest that human imagination can conceive as possible in such company is only a faint shadow of reality. It is useless to try to describe an image of these scenes and relationships, for there are no words to express the truth. The answer to the question must necessarily be that every soul posing the question turns its mental gaze inward and finds the image conceived in its imagination of the highest possible bliss that would be possible in such a state, and even considers this image to remain 1,000 times below reality. Only the harmony of music, or the rhythmic cadences of the finest poetry, or the lines of a great work of art can give to the soul residing on earth a glimpse of the truth of love on the higher astral plane. These things sometimes evoke in the soul faint hints of what is truly experienced on those higher planes of being. That is one of the reasons why music, art, and poetry can sometimes lift us above the material environment in which we live. The flashes of cosmic consciousness that occasionally reach spiritually enlightened souls include an understanding of this characteristic of soul association on the higher planes. The Western poet has well expressed the difficulty of describing in ordinary words the truth of this understanding with assonant rhythms and a language that stammers as if in a fainting fit. One moment another ineffable sun blinds me totally, and all orbs that I knew, and brighter unknown orbs. One moment of the future earth, the heavenly earth. I cannot be awake because nothing seems to me as before, or else I am awake for the first time, and everything before has been a bad dream. When I try to say it as best I can, I fail. My tongue is ineffective on its pivots. My breath does not obey its organs. I become a fool. Walt Whitman. The words of someone speaking of this life must sound empty to those who, on their part, do not reside in the same thought. I dare not speak. My words have not their meaning. August, they remain short and cold, only that same can inspire whoever wishes. And here his speech will be lyrical, sweet, and universal, like the rising of the wind. However, I desire, even with profane words, if I cannot use sacred words, to indicate the heaven of this deity and, in form of the tracks that I have gathered from the transcendence of simplicity and the energy of the supreme law. Emerson. It is difficult to explain to the inhabitant of Earth the nature and character of the company of the higher planes of the astral, for his mind insists on thinking in terms of place, and in the astral there is no place, only conditions and states, as we have explained. Residing in the same place as the beloved on the astral plane simply means residing in the same state or condition of being, and thus being drawn into a closer relationship, a greater degree of closeness than spatial proximity can provide. There is a higher contact in this harmony of astral condition than what the inhabitant of Earth can imagine. Only an advanced soul can begin to understand this mystery of astral life. It can only be faintly represented by referring to the state of unity of the soul, sometimes experienced by lovers, when it seems that the limitations of the flesh have been transcended and the two souls have merged into one. This is much more than mere spatial or locational proximity, and yet it only faintly indicates the ideal condition of astral life. Some may wonder how souls enjoying this company, even if they live on different planes of astral being, can be in the same state or condition where the experience becomes possible. The answer is simple for one familiar with the highest occult truths. The soul in the higher planes feels the sympathetic attraction of the soul in the lower plane, and, in responding to it, establishes a psychic connection similar to a highly exalted form of telepathy between the two, thereby making possible the experience of closer mental and spiritual relationship and companionship, whose experience transcends by far the company of two souls in the flesh. Furthermore, as we explained in a previous chapter, the soul in the higher plane can visit with its entire being another soul in a lower plane. In this way and others, company among the disembodied souls of the astral plane is manifested. There is no loneliness or isolation for souls desiring sympathy. In the astral, there is nothing that is elevated and ennobled in earthly life that does not have its magnified correspondence in the astral plane. Only the dross is left behind. There is a natural law operating in the astral plane as in the material plane, and this law regulates everything in this plane. The discarnate soul does not cease to be part of nature when it leaves earthly life, but rather ascends to a plane of nature that is altogether more complete, richer, and sweeter than anything the earthly dweller can dream of. Having shed the dross of materiality through astral vibrations, the soul flourishes and yields spiritual fruits in the new life. There is one word that, above all, expresses the spiritual meaning and rationale of the higher planes and their phenomena, and that word is love. And this love is perfect love that casts out all fear, whose flower is joy, and whose fruit is peace. 15. Spiritual communication for the advanced occultist. Few things are more deplorable than the confusion, half-truths mixed with falsehoods, false doctrine, and false conclusions of some involved in the subject of spiritual communication in the Western world. And yet, as deplorable as this confusion is, it has nonetheless served to draw the attention of thoughtful individuals to the subject and to prompt them to deeper inquiry. Leaving completely aside the fraudulent and semi-fraudulent phenomena masquerading as spiritual communication, the subject of communication between those in flesh and souls out of flesh can be divided into two general classes, the lower class and the higher class respectively. The lower class consists of cases where discarnate souls of a lower order, the so-called earthbound souls, manifest their presence to those still in flesh. Cases of animating astral shells constitute the class of alleged spiritual communication phenomena, where souls in the higher planes of the astral manifest their presence to those in flesh. The soul in the higher astral planes dwells in the idealistic condition and does not concern itself with the affairs of the world it has left behind. This soul naturally maintains a sympathetic connection with those who are close and dear to it by bonds of love or friendship remaining in the material plane. However, this sympathetic connection is entirely of a psychic or spiritual nature and has nothing to do with spatial proximity or physical closeness. The bonds and unions between the discarnate soul and the soul still in flesh in earthly life can be visualized as spiritual filaments, something akin to a transcendent form of telepathic relationship. When the discarnate soul thinks of the beloved on earth, the latter frequently experiences a feeling akin to physical proximity to the discarnate soul. However, this simply arises from the perception of the mental and spiritual relationship we have just described. Likewise, the discarnate soul feels a sense of calling or message from the person in flesh when the latter thinks intensely of the former. Concerning this continuation of feelings of love and affection between separated souls, only good can be said, for the soul in flesh is comforted and strengthened by the sense of relationship and closeness of the discarnate soul in the astral plane. The discarnate soul experiences pleasure and joy, much as earthly life would from the physical proximity of the beloved. This relationship is particularly sacred and cherished by many in flesh, though they speak little of it to those who would not understand. Those who have had this experience will recognize exactly what these words mean as they read them. Others who have not had these experiences can only understand them by reference to the greatest sense of soul closeness they have ever experienced in earthly life. It is indeed a communion of soul to soul, almost approaching the perfection of soul communion in the astral plane under certain aspects. Though it still leaves something lacking due to the very nature of the case, we wish it to be clearly understood that we have nothing but good to say about this form of spiritual communication between persons bound by bonds of love and friendship, one discarnate and the other in earthly life. What we are now going to condemn is something of an entirely different nature. Advanced occultists are practically unanimous in saying that the practice of attracting the attention of discarnate spirits for purposes of entertainment, curiosity, or general exhibition is highly deplorable. The best authorities condemn this practice in general terms. Firstly, the result is always unsatisfactory for very good occult reasons. Secondly, the effect of such an appeal can be harmful to the discarnate soul, as it diverts its spiritual attention from things of the higher planes and brings it back to things of the material plane, thus retarding its development. And also in disturbing its mind is similar to guiding the growing child's mind towards the things of its prenatal condition, if such a thing were possible. And for the soul that does not understand the nature and character of its astral life, which only the most advanced souls understand, this blending of things and phenomena from the astral and material planes is very disconcerting, confusing, and distracting. The soul must be allowed to naturally develop in its new plane and not be summoned back to earth to satisfy curiosity or provide entertainment. The harm that results from this latter action is similar to that which would arise if one persisted in uprooting a plant every day to see if its roots are sprouting and growing. Another form of recalling the discarnate soul, that of recalling it to console loving friends and family members, is scarcely less undesirable. The discarnate soul, drawn by the sympathetic bond of its connection, returns like a sleepwalker, for that is almost precisely its condition. Sleepwalking is not something desirable to induce in people on earth, and it is no better when induced in a discarnate soul. This soul, coming from its astral experiences in a dazed state, gives little satisfaction to those who call upon it, and truly undergoes a confused and bewildering experience. Those who have had experiences with the calling of discarnate souls when the phenomenon is authentic will easily recall the dazed and confused responses given and the generally unsatisfactory results obtained. Even under the best conditions, The practice of recalling souls from the astral plane is a clear perversion of natural processes, and the result is never satisfactory. This practice is never justified, and the best authorities severely condemn it. The insight into the nature and condition of life in the astral plane that we have provided in this book should be sufficient to clearly understand the reason for this opinion and the cause of the condemnation. It is true that souls in the astral plane, sometimes under the stress of strong memories or concerns about what they have left behind, have voluntarily returned to the plane of earthly life and manifested themselves to the people inhabiting it, sometimes even materializing. These cases are rare but frequent enough for us to mention them in this context. In such cases, the force of the discarnate soul's desire caused it to take on an objective form for the senses of those to whom it appears, just as a very strong telepathic impression will take on an objective form. But even in such cases, the troubled soul gradually moves beyond the attraction of earthly life, ceases to return to its former scenes, and begins to live its normal astral life in accordance with the laws and plans of nature. We know that in stating these truths, we bring disillusionment and perhaps resentment to the minds of some on earth who like to think that they are in frequent communication with the souls of their departed loved ones. But truth is truth, and we are certain that a proper understanding of the subject will reveal to these individuals that the greatest love for those who have gone consists in doing what is best for these dear ones so that they do not continue to sacrifice their higher interest for the selfish purpose of temporary satisfaction on their part. Furthermore, this satisfaction is never truly satisfying. There is always the awareness of lack, that something is not there. True love consists in giving more than receiving. And is this not true in the realm of communication with those loved ones on the other side? Is it not higher and nobler to send them thoughts of love and sympathy, encouraging and supporting them in their development on the higher planes, than to try to bring them back to the lower plane of materiality, only to hear them say that they are happy and that all is well for them, and perhaps to mumble a few incoherent words as if they were sleepwalking? And is it not more worthy of us, who dwell in the bonds of flesh, to elevate the plane of our communion with those on the other side to their own higher plane of being, and to communicate with them in the line of spiritual understanding and relationship, silently and without words, in the plane where soul and soul can speak, without the intermediary of words and without the need for physical presence? Think on these things, and let your soul tell you the truth from the depths of your heart. Be assured that the response will coincide with the truths of the highest authorities. Souls attached to the earth. In works on the subject of the astral plane, especially those of ancient authorities, one will not find many references to what are called souls attached to the earth. Generally, these references are made to the lower order of souls that refuse to lift their mental gaze beyond the things and scenes of the earth, and who frequent their former places of activity and life, finding therein the only pleasure possible in their degraded condition. But in this consideration, let us not neglect to mention a higher order of souls who, unfortunately, slowly sever their earthly ties and cling closely to those who have remained behind. Let us consider this latter class for a moment. It sometimes happens that a soul who is naturally prepared for normal life in the higher astral planes becomes so attached and engrossed in earthly affairs that upon awakening from the sleep of the soul, it initially refuses to engage in the normal astral existence, and instead busies itself with the affairs of earthly life that it should have left behind. This unfortunate condition generally stems from a sense of unfulfilled duty, remorse or anxiety regarding the well-being of certain loved ones who remain. In such cases, it actually hovers in the space around the presence of the person or place that interests it, and under extraordinary psychic conditions, it may become visible to the senses of living people. To this class belong the poor afflicted souls who wander, haunting the scenes of their earthly misdeeds, making futile efforts in their remorse to undo or atone for those misdeeds. Of course, these unhappy souls are not fully awake in the astral plane, nor even fully awake in the earthly plane of life. They act like sleepwalkers on both planes, not participating in the normal life of either phase of existence. Similar to these are those preoccupied and tormented souls who feel that there is an unfulfilled duty or task, and who, in a condition of somnambulism, wander around their former places of life, striving in a dreamlike state to set things right. A third class is composed of some who are so personally attached to the souls remaining in the flesh that they care for the loved ones, struggling helplessly to aid and guide them. In all these cases, there is a unique duty for those in the flesh that is clearly marked. This duty consists of mentally advising the poor souls that their proper scene of activity is in the astral plane, that their duty requires them to cease worrying and visiting earthly scenes, and that they must yield to the upward attraction, rise to their own astral plane of existence, and enjoy its blessings. Those who are aware of the presence of discarnate souls of this type must not shirk this duty, no matter how much it may pain them to instruct the discarnate soul in this manner. It is akin to speaking to a small child in most cases, due to the semi-asleep condition of the earthbound soul. Though the soul may suffer and cry like a child, like the child who must be ordered to perform its duty and return to its spiritual home, this counsel will often be heeded by the earthbound soul, which will yield to the upward attraction and end its troubled existence. However, over time, even without this counsel, the attraction of the higher spheres will prevail, and the soul will rise to its rightful place in the astral. We caution against encouraging the earthbound soul to remain. It is like encouraging the fetus to stay in the womb or the butterfly to remain in the chrysalis stage. Nothing good comes from encouraging a violation of the laws of nature on any plane of existence, including the astral. The lowest class of earthbound souls belongs to a category entirely different from the one we have just mentioned. This class consists of souls of very low spiritual development, where animality predominates, and whose characteristic emotional attribute is material brutality. These souls are considered earthbound because the attraction of the earthly material plane is so superior to the upward impulse that the latter is neutralized, and the soul lives on a plane as close as possible to the material plane. Indeed, the lower planes of the astral inhabited by this class of souls are so little removed from the material plane that they can be considered almost a transition stage between the material plane and the astral plane, a combination of the two. It is as if a very thin veil were placed between this plane and the scenes of material life, a tempting veil for these lower souls, so that although these souls cannot truly participate in earthly affairs, they can still be vaguely aware of them. These lower earthbound souls, as a rule, limit their visits to actual scenarios that drew them into earthly life, and they diabolically delight in trying to influence those of their own kind who are still in the flesh, inciting them to commit further infamies and often actual crimes. In some extreme cases, it is known that these lower souls actually seek out their own discarded astral shell, or even those of others of their class, and by great effort they cause it to materialize for a brief time, taking on objective form like a ghost. The nature of these entities changes little in their transition to the astral, and they experience the same pleasure with their tasteless pranks, etc., as in their days in the flesh. Many cases of ghostly apparitions, physical object throwings, etc., are due to this class of earthbound souls. The person in the flesh can always drive them away and make them disappear by showing them that they understand their true nature and asking them to leave, boldly confronting them with authoritative orders, accompanied by words showing that their pretensions have been discovered. This will always defeat these creatures and send them back where they belong, dejected and overwhelmed. Another favorite diversion of some discarnate souls of this type is to appear in astral form using an astral shell during seances or other gatherings where psychic conditions are strong enough and favorable to aid in materialization. In such cases, these creatures often strive to brazenly pass themselves off as other souls, whether a friend or relative of someone present or even some other historical character. Anyone who has attended seances and seen George Washington or Julius Caesar appear and engage in theatrical tones and words will easily understand the reason for this. Knowing this fact will help illuminate many perplexing phases of psychic phenomena. However, even among these poor entities there is at least some degree of hope and promise. Most are degenerate and fallen souls, descended from a state that was once higher. If they do not benefit from the pains of material life, They tend to fall even lower until benevolent nature wipes them out as independent entities and dissolves them back into their original spiritual elements. There are subplanes of the astral so low and degraded that we dare not speak of them. They are inhabited by the lowest, degraded and degenerate souls that inevitably descend toward their annihilation, being unfit to serve as bearers of the sacred plan. We will not go into detail about these subplanes here, but will simply quote the words of two distinguished occultists, one from an earlier time and the other current. The ancient sage said of these subplanes, "What kind of place is this that I see? It has no water, it has no air, light does not bathe it, it has no foundation, it is unfathomable." What you find in this section of research is an extremely unpleasant task, for there seems to be a sensation of density and gross materiality that is indescribably repugnant to the liberated astral body. It gives it the sensation of making its way through a viscous black fluid, while the inhabitants and influences there are exceptionally undesirable. It should hardly be necessary to remind the uninitiated to psychic phenomena of a material nature that they will more or less put them in contact with these lower planes of the astral. We wish, however, to give this warning here, as we have done elsewhere in our work, for there is always the temptation and fascination of the unknown. Generally, those unfamiliar with phenomena of the astral plane rush, where angels fear to tread and attract all sorts of undesirable astral entities and conditions, our general advice on this subject is to keep the mind focused on the higher truths of spirit and the higher life of the soul, and firmly avert the gaze from the lower forms of psychic phenomena. Indeed, phenomena should never be sought. What should always be sought is truth, which, once known, enlightens all other things. One should always seek the sunlight of the spirit and avoid the heavy shadow of the psychic moon. Astral shells. We would neglect the task to which we have devoted ourselves in this book if we omitted any mention of a phenomenon of the astral plane that causes much confusion to all beginners in the study of psychic phenomena. We refer to what is rightly called astral shells, the worn-out astral bodies of souls that have awakened from astral sleep. These soul garments, often mistaken for the soul itself, have caused much confusion. Every human entity on Earth has, in addition to the physical body, a finer and subtler body called the astral body, sometimes called the etheric double, known to Hindus as the linga sharira. This astral body is an exact counterpart of the physical body and is, in fact, the finer model upon which the physical body is shaped or overlaid. When the soul leaves the physical body, it takes the astral body with it as its vehicle, and during soul sleep it sheds it. After the death of the person to whom it belongs, and under certain circumstances, it is visible to living persons and is called by them a ghost. The astral shell, sometimes seen after the deceased soul has detached itself, is in such cases only a corpse of matter finer than its physical counterpart. It has no life or intelligence, and it is like seeing a cloud in the sky that resembles the human form. It is simply a shell. When the soul sheds it, it begins to slowly disintegrate, floating in the lower astral atmosphere until it finally dissolves back into its original elements. It seems to have a particular attraction towards its deceased physical counterpart and will often return to the vicinity of the discarded physical body, disintegrating along with it. Those with psychic vision, whether normal or influenced by fear or similar emotions, often see these astral shells floating in cemeteries, on battlefields, etc., and confuse them with the spirits of the deceased. But these are not the true souls of people, just as they are not the physical bodies buried beneath the ground. These astral shells can be galvanized to acquire an appearance of life by coming into contact with the vitality of certain mediums, being animated by the prana of the latter and by the subconscious mind of the mediums that causes them to manifest signs of partial life and intelligence. In some mediumship sessions, these astral shells materialize through the vitality of the medium and are induced to speak with the sitters in a foolish and artificial manner. However, it is not the person speaking, but simply a shell animated by the life principle of the medium and the circle, acting and speaking like an automaton. Of course, there are other forms of spiritual return, but spiritualist researchers must be careful not to confuse these astral shells with the actual soul of their deceased friends. A leading authority on the subject wrote the following about the astral shell. When it dies, it becomes incorporeal for a short period, and in certain abnormal conditions, it may even be temporarily visible to the still living. In such conditions, it is mistaken for the ghost of the deceased. Spectral apparitions can sometimes be caused in other ways, but the third principle, the astral body, when resulting in visible phenomena, is a simple aggregation of molecules in a particular state, without any life or consciousness of any kind. It is like a cloud in the sky, taking on the appearance of some animal form. In general terms, the linga sharira never leaves the body except in death, where it may be seen, and as it cannot migrate far from the body, even in this rare occurrence, it can only be seen near the physical body. Referring to the astral shell or remnant, it is incorrect to speak of consciousness as we understand it in life. Although it may have some deceptive resemblance, and although it has no connection with reality, at the same time, it may grow in strength and vitality in the spiritual sphere. The shell cannot assimilate new ideas or initiate courses of action based on these new ideas. However, there is within the shell a survival of volitional impulses transmitted to it during life. It may be galvanized for a time by the medium's current and acquire a state of consciousness and life comparable to that of a person placed in a strange room in a state of insensibility during an illness, waking feebly, mentally confused, with vacant eyes and a sense of bewilderment, receiving impressions, hearing words addressed to it, and responding vaguely. This state of consciousness is not associated with notions of past and future. It is an automatic consciousness derived from the environment. Another writer on the subject says of these astral shells, "These remnants of discarded and disintegrating astral bodies are in no way connected with the souls that previously inhabited them. They are soulless, spiritless shells, but they still retain a slight degree of vitality. They are astral corpses, as much corpses as the rejected physical body, but just as the physical corpse can be made to simulate life. Through a strong galvanic current, and to roll the eyes, move the limbs, and even emit groans. Similarly, these astral bodies can be galvanized if conditions are favorable by the vitality of an unconscious medium and may materialize to appear as a dark form acting, moving and even speaking. Although the mind is one, it is supplied by the medium or by those present at the sitting. The attentive student of occultism will find in the works of all the best authorities many warnings against the confusion of phenomena related to these astral shells. Regarding true communication between incorporeal souls and those of the flesh, the public, being uninformed, is very prone to fall into the error of supposing that this type of psychic phenomenon is a manifestation of spiritual return, which has greatly harmed the cause of rational spiritualism. It is a dreadful mockery to galvanize these disintegrating astral shells, to temporarily bring them back to life through the vitality and spirits of a conscious or unconscious medium, and to confuse them with the souls of deceased friends and family members. Yet, this terrible experience has been the fate of many serious seekers in psychic phenomena and of many individuals whose love has prompted them to seek to communicate once again with their loved ones. There seems to be a great need for true occult knowledge among the public today, as many venture into psychic research and produce psychic phenomena whose nature and character escape their understanding. We hope that nothing we have said in this chapter, or in the preceding chapters, will be taken as an attack on modern spiritualism or spiritism in the Western world. We have no such intention or sentiment. We realize that through the channel of modern spiritualism, many sincere souls have been led to the understanding of higher spiritual truths and have been led to the threshold of higher occult understanding. Indeed, modern spiritualism today cares little for phenomena, but rather strives to unfold the truths of life in the higher spheres of being and soul existence. However, on the fringes of the movement, there are many who are attracted only to phenomena of a more sensational nature. It is to them that this warning is directed, as well as to those who follow the psychic research movement drawn by the love of the new and the hope of excitement. We caution both classes of seekers that by opening the doors of their minds and souls to lower astral influences, they run great risks. There are swamps and dead ends in the astral world where the imprudent feet are liable to sink. Therefore, we say, beware of lower astral vibrations. Thought and soul must remain centered on higher truths and resist the temptation to venture into phenomena of lower states. There is no satisfaction in the lunar phase of occultism, and often enormous dangers are encountered there. We must turn our face towards the sun. We must dwell in spiritual heights and beware of miasmatic swamps and malaria, dead ends in the depths of the psyche. Those who have the interest of the human race at heart cannot repeat these warnings too often. The second sleep of the soul. One of the many facts impressed upon the mind of the occult student illustrates the principle that nature is consistent and uniform in its methods across the various planes of being. Nature has some methods or fundamental habits of manifestation that the student soon learns to look for in his researches and always finds if he pursues his researches with sufficient care and vigilance. One of these constant methods or habits of nature is that by which it always interposes a period of rest, pause, sleep, or recuperation between the end of one period of activity and the beginning of another. On the physical plane, we have many instances of this, from the momentary pause of the pendulum between its swing forward and backward, the pause between the inhalation and exhalation of breath, the sleep between the end of one day and the beginning of another, the resting period of the fetus between its formation period and birth into the world, and so forth. In the astral world, we find the same phenomenon in the sleep of the soul that occurs between what we call death and the beginning of new existence on the astral plane. Due to natural analogy, we might naturally expect there to be a similar phase or period between the closing activities of the soul on the astral plane and its passage to reincarnation or higher spheres of spiritual life. Indeed, such a phase or period exists and constitutes a very distinct feature of soul existence on the other side. Occultists know this phase or period as the second sleep of the soul. The second sleep of the soul is preceded by a state of transition, gradual declining activity and consciousness, as well as a corresponding desire for rest on the part of the soul. As natural processes on the astral plane draw to a close, the soul begins to feel a sense of weariness and fatigue, and instinctively yearns for rest. It is considered to have lived out the greater part of its desires, ambitions, and ideals, and in many cases, beyond. It reaches this melancholic feeling of having accomplished the purpose of its destiny and a premonition of the arrival of a new phase of existence. The soul does not feel pain approaching the second sleep of the soul, but rather satisfaction and happiness, like the arrival of something promising rest and recuperation. Just like the weary traveler who has climbed the mountain trails and rejoiced in the experiences of the journey, the soul feels it has earned restorative rest and, like that traveler, eagerly awaits and desires it. The soul may have spent a few years, or perhaps 100 or 1,000 years of earthly time on the astral plane, depending on its degree of development, but whether its residence has been short or long, eventually, the feeling of fatigue sets in. Like many elderly individuals in earthly life, it feels that its work is done. Let me rest. Let me rest. Sooner or later, the soul feels the desire to acquire new experience and to manifest in a new life some portion of the progress it has achieved due to its development on the astral plane. For these reasons, and also due to the attraction of desires unfulfilled or not abandoned, which burned there, or perhaps influenced by the fact that a beloved soul on a lower plane is ready to incarnate and wishes to be with that soul, which is also a form of desire, the soul enters into a current that leads it towards rebirth and the choice of appropriate parents, circumstances, and advantages. Consequently, it falls back into a state of soul sleep gradually, and thus, when its time comes, it dies on the astral plane as it did previously on the material plane, and it advances towards rebirth on earth. However, in reality, the soul remains in a state of partial lethargy, even after being reborn into earthly life, because it does not immediately awaken in the body of the newborn into which it has reincarnated. Instead, It gradually awakens during the infancy and youth of the child. This is a very interesting fact of occult science, and little known even to many attentive students. We have discussed it in a previous work. A soul does not fully awaken from its second sleep of the soul immediately after rebirth, but exists in a dreamlike state during the days of childhood, its gradual awakening manifested by the increasing intelligence of the baby and the child's brain keeping pace with the demands imposed upon it. However, in some cases the awakening is premature, and we see cases of prodigies, child geniuses, etc. But such cases are more or less abnormal and unhealthy. Sometimes the dreamy soul in the child partially awakens and surprises us with deep observation, commentary, or mature behavior. The strange cases of precocious children and infant geniuses are illustrations of cases where the awakening has been quicker than average. On the other hand, there are known cases where the soul does not awaken as quickly as average, and the result is that the person does not show signs of full intellectual activity until almost middle age. There are cases where individuals seem to awaken when they are 40 years old, or even older, and then acquire renewed activity and energy, surprising those who knew them previously. But we are primarily interested in the early stages of the second sleep of the soul, the stages that take place on the astral plane. In these early stages, the sleeping soul undergoes a particular phase of what could be called spiritual digestion and assimilation. Just as in its first sleep of the soul directed the fruits of its life on earth and assimilated yesterday's lessons in a modest manner. In this sleep, the soul digests and assimilates the wonderful experiences of the astral plane. Because it remembers, the period on the astral plane was not only retrospective on one side, and manifestation of latent powers on the other, but also a period of reconstruction and development. Many things were lived and experienced in the astral plane, and the soul leaves the astral plane as a very different entity from the one that entered it. But, and it is worth remembering this as well, the change is always for the better. Many undesirable characteristics have been consumed by the fires of repentance and remorse, and many desirable characteristics have developed in the rich spiritual soil of the higher planes, aided by the sunlight of the spirit that envelops the soul in the higher planes. However, a process of inventory, readjustment of mental conditions, and spiritual preparation for a new life is always necessary. And this is provided during the early stages of the second sleep of the soul. In the same way that the child or adult receives the necessary energy for the work of the new day from sleep. At the end of the previous day, the sleeping soul receives energy from the single source, so that it can face the new life with vigor and power. We do not delve here into the details of this recovery work, as we wish to avoid any appearance of technicality. It is enough to say that the soul receives a fresh surge of energy, and also receives the psychic blueprint of its new physical body during the second sleep of the soul. During this sleep, the soul is also allowed to experience the attractive power of its karmic ties, which leads it towards the channel of rebirth, according to the character of its nature. Like attracts like is the axiom that expresses the processes. Each soul goes where it belongs because of what it is. It is not subject to the arbitrary dictates of any being in heaven or on earth. It is the law of karma, absolutely just and fair, that operates in all cases. There is no favoritism, and there is not the slightest possibility that any injustice is the fate of any soul, no matter how humble or lowly. Both the lowest and the highest are subject to the same law, for all are children of the same Father, all are toddlers in the nursery of the Absolute. All are on the path, whether they know it or not, and their ignorance is not taken into account in the calculation. In the final chapter of this book, we will discuss a class of souls that rise above reincarnation on earthly life and ascend to planes and stages of existence far beyond anything the earth can offer. We mention them here simply to say that even these souls must pass through the second sleep of the soul on the astral plane before they can continue. In such cases, they lose, during their sleep, everything that remains of the envelopes of earthly desires and abandon all the fruits of earthly action, except what is called liberation and freedom. Such souls never awaken again on earth or return there unless they voluntarily visit the earth after centuries as great masters or leaders. These souls have sometimes used the envelope of human beings, occasionally over the centuries, but they have always been much more than humans in every respect except physical form. There are planes upon planes of existence higher than the earth or its astral plane. Blessed is the soul that awakens from the second sleep of the soul and finds itself even in the humblest of these exalted states. For the wisest sage bows his head in reverence at the mention of these spheres of existence that transcend even human imagination. Renewal. In the previous chapter, we explained that the soul, after sinking into the second sleep of the soul, is caught by the currents of karmic attraction and led towards rebirth in an environment and with ties in accordance with the sum of its character and desires. As we will see in the next chapter, some souls escape this current of rebirth and are led towards higher spheres of activity and being. However, by far the vast majority of souls on the astral plane move towards earthly rebirth because such is their karma. But here, we must warn the student not to fall into the too common error of supposing that this karma is something severe, dispensing rewards and punishments according to an established code. Karma is simply the law of spiritual cause and effect. We are not punished because of our sins, but by them. We are not rewarded because of our good deeds, but by them. In summary, our rewards and punishments stem from the very nature of our character, and our character is the total sum of our desires. Therefore, desire is the driving force of karma, and through karma, of our rebirths. To many, it seems that being reborn on earth is something imposed upon the soul against its desires. The opposite is true. The sum of the soul's desires is the true driving force that leads to rebirth. Those who are reborn on earth do not do so against their will or desire. On the contrary, they are reborn because they truly desire it. They are swept along by the current of rebirth because their tastes and desires have created aspirations that can only be satisfied by a renewed life in the flesh. Even if they are not conscious of it instinctively, they place themselves once again within the operations of the law of attraction and are drawn towards rebirth exactly in the environment best calculated to live and overcome those desires, to express and exhaust the force of desire. They hunger to fulfill their aspirations, and as long as this hunger is not appeased, the desires cannot be abandoned. This does not mean that every desire must necessarily be lived out, for it often happens that a new vision and experience lead the soul to develop disgust for the old object of desire, and the desire dies a natural death. But as long as the desire remains alive, it tends to draw the soul towards objects and environments that are likely to satisfy it. This is true for the soul on the astral plane and in earthly life. Desire is always the great driving force of the soul to determine rebirth. By preserving its desire for material things, the things of the flesh and material life, and by being unable to naturally detach from these things, the soul will inevitably fall into the current of rebirth, leading it to conditions where those desires will flourish and manifest. It is only when the soul, through many earthly lives, begins to see the futility and illusory nature of worldly desires that it starts to be drawn towards things of a higher nature. By escaping the currents of earthly rebirth, it rises above them and is led towards higher spheres. After years of earthly experience, the person may say that they have no more desire to live on earth, and that their only desire is to leave it forever. These individuals are perfectly sincere in their statements and beliefs, but a look into their innermost soul would reveal a completely different state of affairs. They are generally not tired of earthly life, but simply of the particular class of earthly life they have experienced during this incarnation. They have discovered the illusory nature of a certain set of earthly experiences and feel disgust for them, but they are still filled with another set of desires and hunger for another set of experiences on earth. They have not been able to find happiness or satisfaction in their own experience, but they will admit, if they are honest with themselves, that if they could have had this or that instead of this and that, they would have found happiness and satisfaction. It may have been fulfilled love, wealth, fame, accomplished ambition, success of various types, etc. But whatever it may be, the yes is almost always there, And this yes is truly the seed of their remaining desires, and the desire for this yes is truly the reason for rebirth. Very few people would care to relive their earthly life according to their own statements, and they are quite honest in declaring it. But like old Omar, they would be perfectly willing to remake the world according to the desire of their heart, and then to live life on earth. We understand what we mean. They have no aversion to earthly life. What they despise are the particular experiences of this life, offer middle-aged men and women youth, health, wealth, talent, and love, and they will be very willing to start life over. Earthly life is simply the absence of these things, or failure, etc., which makes them feel that life is a failure, something to be joyfully left behind. The soul, in its sojourn on the astral plane, rests, refreshes, and revitalizes itself. It has forgotten the weariness of the life it experienced in the previous incarnation. Once again, it is young with vigorous and ambitious hope. It feels within itself the call to action, the impulse of desires, aspirations, and ambitions unrealized, and it easily falls into currents that lead it to scenes of action where these desires can manifest. We have many cases of this change of feeling in earthly life. We feel tired, discouraged, even disgusted with our earthly affairs at the end of the day, the year, or a period of emotions. But rest, sleep, a change of scene, and the influx of new impressions bring about a change, and in no time we are filled with desire for new activities and actions. Most people are not really tired of life or disgusted with the things of life. They are simply experiencing the human impulse towards something else, somewhere else. A change of scene and occupation might effect a quick healing in them. They are not tired of the world. They are simply mentally and emotionally tired. So it is with the weary soul. Change its place of residence to the astral, give it the elixir of life, and it will be ready to play another role in the drama of life. Another point on which there is much misunderstanding is the question of the unconsciousness of the soul in choosing the environment of the new birth. It is true that in undeveloped souls, the process is almost entirely instinctive, and there is practically no conscious realization or choice in the matter. But as the soul begins to develop and unfold spiritual knowledge, it starts to have a vision and spiritual consciousness. In many cases, it sees vaguely, as in a dream, the conditions towards which it is being led during the second sleep of the soul, and often exercises a decided choice in the case of a strong personality. When ESP development is present, there is often more than mere dream choice, for such a soul does much to create the circumstances of its newborn, always within the limits of its karma, of course. Another point that needs to be clarified concerns the character of the desires that serve as the driving force for rebirth. It is not meant that these desires are necessarily low or unworthy desires. On the contrary, they may be of the highest character and might more appropriately be called aspirations, ambitions, or high goals. But the principle of desire is present in them all. High and low desires are the seeds of action, and the impulse towards action is always the distinguishing feature of desire. Desire always wants to have things, do things, or be things. Even the most selfless love is a form of desire. Likewise, the noblest aspiration, a desire to benefit others, is as much a desire as its opposite. In fact, many selfless souls return to rebirth simply because of insistent aspirations aiming to accomplish great work for humanity, to serve others, or to perform a duty inspired by love. But high or low, if these desires are in any way connected to earthly things, they are motives and rudders for rebirth. In conclusion, let us say that no soul that, in its innermost part, does not desire to be reborn on earth will not be reborn. Such a soul will be drawn towards other spheres where the attractions of the earth do not exist. Its karma carries it away from the earth, not towards it, but this is the condition of a few. Though gradually, every soul will experience it in the eons to come, for all are on the way, and spiritual evolution advances slowly but surely. Those interested in this higher life of the soul are invited to read the next and final chapter, if their words attract them, the first steps towards realization. Beyond reincarnation, those who imagine that yogic philosophy teaches that the soul has only an endless chain of rebirths on earth or a series of reincarnations have not yet understood the true spirit of the teaching. When one remembers that Earth is just one of countless preparatory worlds that have their beginning in time and their end in time, the absurdity of such a doctrine becomes evident. Earth is just one of the many schools that have formed from time to time in the cosmos, and which, at best, are only lower-level abodes. The human soul persists for eons after this Earth, and millions like it will have vanished into the ether of space from which they originally emerged. Granting such importance to earthly life in the cosmic order goes against the teachings of the sages. Furthermore, it is a false teaching to argue that even in the current era and phase of the soul's existence, the soul cannot advance beyond earthly incarnation, although most of the human race must undergo many earthly incarnations before finding freedom and liberation. It is also true that when a soul reaches the stage of spiritual development, where the bonds of earthly life no longer attach it, it is impossible for such a soul to be subjected to the cycle of earthly reincarnation. There are many souls currently on the astral plane, going through the final stages of releasing earthly bonds. Similarly, there are many souls on Earth currently who will never return to Earth after their next sojourn in the astral plane. Instead, they will ascend to higher planes of existence, leaving Earth and all earthly things behind forever. On the other hand, there are thousands of souls on their way to freedom who will only need to undergo one more earthly life, a life they will live in an exalted state of understanding and wisdom. Currently, we are approaching the end of a cycle where a large number of souls are preparing for their ascension, and many of those reading these lines may be very advanced in this cyclical movement. It would be folly for the human pen to attempt to describe the nature of existence in the highest spheres. Even these spheres, only 1 degree higher than Earth, are indescribable by words and beyond mental concepts that embody the idea. Moreover, most of humanity does not even have the mental apparatus that would allow them to think about the nature of such a life. The average human mind cannot even begin to think about the intermediate planes of the astral, and the concept of the higher astral planes is well beyond its reach. So, what should be your stance regarding the idea of realms of being, compared to which even the highest astral planes are like debris compared to the grand palaces of the world? Enough to know that there is an infinite scale of being composed of realm after realm, rising higher and higher, and that the soul is destined to continually advance towards the infinite. It is possible to escape the cycle of earthly reincarnation when the soul learns the truth about its own nature and its relationship with the whole, when it perceives the illusory nature of the phenomenal universe and understands that the spiritual world is the only real one. Then, the ties of material life begin to fade, and the soul begins to struggle against its attachments. This liberation is the great goal towards which yogic philosophy points. It is the reason, the end, and the objective of yoga. Some achieve it through faithful works, others through love of the divine and the divine spark in their fellows, others through the use of intellect and realization of wisdom, others through the development of intuitive faculties. But all these different paths lead to the same goal. When the nature of earthly things is realized, they lose their hold on the human soul, desire fades, and the soul is liberated to attain spiritual freedom, freed from the attraction of the earth. The soul then takes higher flights and ascends to the highest regions of being. The philosophies of the East are teeming with this idea, which appears in various disguises. For the initiated occultist, the sacred teachings of the world, from all religions, have their esoteric side, and the spirit of esoteric teaching is always liberation. As we write these words, our eyes fall upon a book resting on our table, a brief history of the East told by a Western writer. This writer has captured the spirit of the East and expresses it well. Listen, for they are about the spirit of teaching. The aim of the sage, according to ancient doctrine, is to become an absolute master of himself, to become completely superior, or rather indifferent, to the attachment of all worldly obstacles. The ordinary being is a prisoner, chained in captivity, or bound and tied by the objects of deception and senses. He who aspires to emancipation must first, through a long and exhausting course of penance and austerity, break these attachments until they slip away from his body like water from a duck, and continue to live according to the classical formula, like a wheel that continues to turn when the original impulse has ceased, or like a branch that continues to sway after the bird has departed. He is awake, unlike those who remain blinded by illusion. He is free, unlike those who remain attached. However, the previous writer erred in speaking of the long and exhausting journey of penance and austerity necessary to sever material attachments. The best authorities disapprove of these ascetic and austere practices and do not encourage them. The true practice is the acquisition of wisdom and the opening of the heart to the entrance of divine wisdom, which comes in the form of intuition. It is enough to perceive the real nature of material things to lose desire for them. Thus, knowledge is the great liberator. It is true that great selfless love, bhakti yoga, will remove the scales from the soul's eyes. It is also true that faithful deeds and duty performed without hope of reward, karma yoga, will clarify vision. But the greatest of all yogas is the yoga of wisdom, jnana yoga, knowledge. For those aspiring to liberation, we recommend careful study of yogic philosophy or one of the other great forms of wise religion, as well as careful attention to the spiritual life common to all religions when properly understood. We believe that the best guide on the path is this little manual, Light on the Path, by Mabel Collins, which is based on valid occult axioms even from ancient Atlantis. In this precious manual, one finds the rules inscribed on the walls of the learning hall by the leaders of the Golden Gates. As one writer said, "What Parsifal is to music lovers, Light on the Path is to aspiring souls, an endless source of inspiration and admiration." The following axioms or aphorisms, drawn from its pages, give their main key when properly understood. The rest of the manual follows from these axioms. 1. Kill ambition. 2. Kill the desire for life. 3. Kill the desire for comfort. 4. Kill all sense of separation. 5. Kill the desire for sensations. 6. Kill the hunger for growth. 7. Desire only that which is within you. 8. Desire only that which is beyond you. 9. Desire only that which is inaccessible. 10. Ardently desire power. 11. Ardently desire peace. 12. Desire possession above all. 13. Seek the way. 14. Seek the way by retiring within yourself. 15. Seek the way by boldly advancing outward. 16. Withdraw in the battle to come, and even as you struggle, let not yourself be the warrior. 17. Seek the warrior, and let him fight in you. 18. Take his orders for battle and obey. 21. Learn from it the lesson of harmony. 22. Seriously observe all life around you. 23. Learn to look intelligently into people's hearts. 24. Observe your own heart more closely. 25. Investigate the earth, air, and water, and the secrets they hide for you. 26. Ask the saints of the earth for the secrets they hide for you. 27. Inquire into the innermost of the One, its ultimate secret hidden for you through the eons. 28. Attach yourself to what has neither substance nor existence. 29. Listen only to the voice of silence. 30. Look only at what is invisible, both to the inner and outer sense. These axioms have 7 meanings layered on top of one another, which are only discovered through the revelation of the soul's eyes as it develops. Blessed is he who can understand even the first set of meanings, for he is on the path. In commenting on these axioms in the little manual, the writer gives the following precious advice to those seeking the path of liberation and peace. Seek in the heart the source of evil and root it out from there. It lives fruitfully in the heart of the devout disciple, as well as in the heart of the one who desires only. Only the strong can kill it. The weak must wait for its growth, its fruition, its death, and it is a plant that lives and grows through the centuries. It blossoms when the individual has accumulated for himself countless existences. He who enters the path of power must tear it from his heart. And then the heart will bleed, and all life will seem to dissolve completely. This terrible experience must be endured. It may occur at the first step of the perilous staircase leading to the path of life. It may not reach the last. But, O disciple, remember that it must be endured. Put the energies of your soul into the task. Live neither in the present nor in the future, but in eternity. That giant herb cannot bloom there. That blemish on existence is eradicated by the very atmosphere of eternal thought. The same author gives the following advice: seek for the flower to blossom in the silence that follows the storm. Until then, it will not grow. It will rise, form branches and leaves, and bud as long as the storm continues, as long as the battle lasts. But not until the entire personality of the individual has dissolved and merged, not until it has been used by the divine fragment that created it as a mere subject for serious experiments and experiences, not until all nature has yielded and submitted to its higher being, can the flower open. Then will come a calm like that which occurs in a tropical country after a heavy rain, when nature works so rapidly that one can see its action. Such tranquility will come to the tormented spirit, and in deep silence will occur the mysterious event that will prove that the path has been found. Call it by whatever name you wish. It is a voice that speaks where there is none to speak. It is a messenger that comes, a messenger without form of substance, or it is the flower of the soul that has opened. It cannot be described by any metaphor, but it can be felt, sought, and desired, even amidst the fury of the storm. The silence may last for a moment or 1,000 years, but it will end. Yet carry its strength with you. Again and again the battle must be fought and won. Only at intervals can nature be calm. In conclusion, let us quote again the author of the above words, words also inspired by a higher source of authority and wisdom. 3 truths exist, truths that are absolute and cannot be lost, but may remain silent for lack of expression. 1. The soul of humanity is immortal, and its future is the future of something whose growth and expansion have no limit. 2. The principle that gives life resides within us, and without us is eternal and eternally benevolent. It is unheard, unseen, unfelt, but is perceived by the individual who desires perception. 3. Every human being is his own absolute legislator, the dispenser of glory or sadness for himself, who decrees his life, his reward, his punishment. These truths, as grand as life itself, are as simple as the simplest mind of the human being. Feed them to the hungry, and now, friend and reader, we leave you once again. We trust that what we have said will be the seed of future trees of knowledge within you, for it is the greatest hope that the Master can have, to plant seeds. We trust that we have at least brought you to the gates of the perception of truth, that there is no death, that what we call death is but the other side of life, and one with it. May your own spiritual eyes open so that you may perceive these truths for yourself and through your own experience. And now, once again, good student, we say to you, peace be with you.